Story 1. I tracked my wife to a secret meetup and discovered she was cheating with my estranged brother. Then I fell in love with him and left her. My wife Emma had been acting strange for weeks. Secret phone calls in the bathroom, deleting text messages, lying about working late when her office building had security logs showing she left at 5 p.m. every night. I found a receipt from a downtown cocktail bar tucked in her jacket pocket, dated on a night she claimed she was at her book club. Her book club that I knew for a fact didn't meet that week because I'd seen the group chat when her phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I did what anyone would do. I checked her location sharing one night when she said she was meeting her coworker Sarah for dinner. Sarah, who I knew was visiting her parents in Ohio that entire week because Emma had mentioned it herself 3 days earlier. The blue dot on my phone showed Emma at the Violet Room, this upscale bar near the waterfront that we'd been to once for my company's holiday party. My stomach dropped. I grabbed my keys. The drive took 12 minutes, but felt like an hour. I parked 2 blocks away and walked to the bar, my hands shaking so badly I could barely pull the door open. The place was dimly lit with purple ambient lighting and leather booths lining the walls. I scanned the room methodically, booth by booth, until I saw her. Back corner. Emma was sitting across from someone, leaning forward with her elbows on the table, laughing at something they'd said, the way she laughed. That specific laugh she used to give me during our first year of dating. My chest tightened. I moved closer, staying behind a group of people at the bar, trying to get a better look at who she was with. The person had dark hair, wearing a black leather jacket, their back to me. Emma reached across the table and squeezed their hand. That's when the person turned slightly to signal the waiter, and I saw his face. Marcus. My brother Marcus, who I hadn't spoken to in 7 years. Marcus, who disappeared after our father's funeral when he told the family he was done with all of us. Marcus, who changed his number and blocked me on every platform and moved across the country without leaving a forwarding address. I stood there frozen behind a pillar, watching my wife hold hands with my estranged brother in a cocktail bar while they shared loaded fries and whiskey. The waiter brought them another round. Emma was glowing. She never glowed like that with me anymore. I turned around and walked out before they could see me. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, trying to understand what I'd just witnessed. My wife was cheating on me with my brother. My brother, who she'd met exactly once, briefly, at my father's funeral 7 years ago. They'd barely exchanged 10 words that day. How did this even happen? I drove home and got into bed with all my clothes on. Emma came home around 1 a.m. I heard her keys in the door, her footsteps in the hallway, the bathroom sink running. She slid into bed next to me and kissed my forehead, whispering that Sarah says hi and that dinner was great. I kept my eyes closed and said nothing. The lie felt like acid in my throat. The next morning, I woke up to Emma making pancakes in the kitchen, humming along to some playlist on her phone. She was in a good mood, better than I'd seen her in months. She plated the pancakes with fresh berries and brought them to the table with orange juice and coffee. "Good morning, love," she said, kissing the top of my head. I couldn't eat. I pushed the food around my plate while she talked about her plans for the weekend, some gallery opening she wanted us to attend together. Finally, I put my fork down and looked at her directly. "I know you weren't with Sarah last night." Her face changed. The smile disappeared. She set down her coffee mug slowly and asked what I was talking about. I told her I tracked her location, that I saw her at the Violet Room, that I saw her with someone. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a genuine, relieved laugh that confused me even more. "Oh my God," she said, still laughing. "You thought I was cheating." I told her I didn't know what to think, but yes, that's exactly what it looked like. She reached across the table and took my hand. That was Marcus. As if that explained anything. As if that made it better. I pulled my hand back and asked why the hell she was secretly meeting my estranged brother at a bar, why she lied about it, why she was holding his hand and laughing like they were on a date. Emma's expression shifted to something more serious. She explained that Marcus had reached out to her on Instagram 3 months ago, that he'd been in therapy working through family trauma and wanted to reconnect, but wasn't ready to reach out to me directly yet, that he asked if they could meet first, privately, so he could figure out how to approach me after all these years of silence. She said she didn't tell me because she didn't want to get my hopes up in case Marcus changed his mind or didn't show up, that she was protecting me from potential disappointment. The explanation sounded reasonable, but the hand-holding, the laughter, the way she looked at him. I asked her to show me their messages. She unlocked her phone immediately and handed it to me. I scrolled through months of conversations between Emma and Marcus. He'd initiated contact in February. Their early messages were brief and awkward. Then they started getting longer, more personal. He talked about his life in Seattle, his career as a physical therapist, his struggle with depression after cutting off the family. Emma responded with empathy and encouragement. By April, they were texting daily, making plans to meet up. Their messages had inside jokes, emojis, a familiarity that felt too intimate for two people who barely knew each other. I asked Emma when she was planning to tell me about this. She said she was waiting for Marcus to be ready, that he wanted to tell me himself, that last night was supposed to be their final meeting before he reached out to me directly to reconnect. I didn't believe her. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. The secrecy, the frequency of their contact, the way she lit up when she talked about him. I told her I wanted to meet Marcus myself. If he was really trying to reconnect with family, he should be able to face me. Emma hesitated, then agreed. She texted Marcus right there at the breakfast table. His response came back in 30 seconds. "Tell Ryan I'm ready. Let's meet tomorrow." We set up a meeting at a coffee shop downtown for the following afternoon. I barely slept that night, running through every possible scenario in my head. What if Marcus was manipulating Emma? What if they really were having an affair? What if this whole reconnection story was a cover for something else? The questions spiraled until Emma finally told me to stop pacing and come to bed. The coffee shop was crowded when I arrived. Emma was already there, sitting at a corner table with Marcus. I saw him through the window before I went inside. He looked different. Older, obviously. His hair was longer. He had a beard now, but his posture was the same, that casual confidence he'd always had. I walked in, and Emma waved me over. Marcus stood up when I approached. We stared at each other for a few seconds before he extended his hand. "Hey, Ryan." His voice was exactly as I remembered it. I shook his hand and sat down. The conversation started awkwardly. Marcus apologized for disappearing. He explained that after Dad died, he realized how toxic our family dynamics were and needed to completely disconnect to work on himself. He said he went to therapy twice a week for 4 years, that he finally felt stable enough to reach out, that Emma had been helping him prepare to reconnect with me. He seemed genuine. But I kept watching the way he and Emma interacted, the way they finished each other's sentences, the way she touched his arm when she laughed, the way he looked at her when she wasn't looking at him. We talked for 2 hours. Marcus told me about his life in Seattle, the patients he worked with, the running group he'd joined. He asked about my job, my life, what I'd been up to for the past 7 years. Emma sat between us, facilitating the conversation, making sure neither of us felt awkward. By the end, Marcus suggested we all have dinner together that weekend. Emma agreed immediately. I said yes because I didn't know what else to say. As we were leaving, Marcus hugged Emma goodbye. A long hug. Too long. I watched them and felt something shift in my chest. Not jealousy. Something else. Something I couldn't identify yet. That weekend, Marcus came over for dinner. Emma cooked her specialty, this Italian pasta dish with homemade sauce. Marcus brought wine. Expensive wine from some boutique. Vineyard in Oregon. We ate and drank and talked about everything except the 7 years of silence between us. It felt almost normal, almost like we were a regular family. Except I kept noticing small things. The way Marcus complimented Emma's cooking with genuine enthusiasm. The way he helped her clean up without being asked. The way he listened when she talked about her stressful week at work, actually listened, asking follow-up questions and offering thoughtful responses. Things I used to do but had stopped doing somewhere along the way. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Emma put on music. We drank more wine. The conversation got more personal. Marcus talked about his struggles with depression, how he'd felt suffocated by our family's expectations his entire life, how leaving was the only way he could survive. I found myself opening up too, admitting that I'd felt abandoned when he left, that I'd needed him during Dad's funeral, and he just disappeared. Marcus apologized again, said he knew it was selfish, but he had to save himself first. Emma sat between us on the couch, her hand on my knee, listening. At some point, she excused herself to take a phone call from her mother. Marcus and I were alone for the first time. He looked at me directly and said, "I need to tell you something." My stomach dropped. Here it comes. The confession. The affair. He took a breath and said, "I'm bisexual. I came out about 3 years ago. It's part of why I needed distance from the family. I couldn't be myself around Dad or anyone else. But Emma knows. She's been really supportive." I didn't know what to say. I told him I was glad he trusted me enough to share that it didn't change anything between us. He smiled, this sad smile, and said, "That's good, because I need you to know I'm not trying to take Emma from you. I know how it might look. But she's been a friend. That's all." The relief I felt should have been stronger. Instead, I realized I'd been feeling something else entirely. I'd been feeling drawn to Marcus. The way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he looked at me when he talked about his life. I'd been projecting my own feelings onto Emma, assuming she was attracted to him because I was. That night, after Marcus left, Emma asked me how I felt about everything. I told her I wasn't sure, that I was confused. She said that was understandable, and that we should all just take things slow. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a regular presence in our lives. He'd come over for dinner. We'd meet up for drinks. Emma invited him to her work events. They texted constantly. I found myself looking forward to seeing him more than I looked forward to time alone with Emma. I started noticing details. The way his laugh sounded. The way he rolled up his sleeves when he was cooking. The way he'd touch my shoulder when he made a joke. One night, Emma fell asleep early, and Marcus and I stayed up talking on the back patio. We'd both had too much whiskey. The conversation turned to relationships. Marcus asked me point blank if I was happy with Emma. I hesitated too long before answering. He nodded like he understood. Then he asked, "Have you ever questioned your sexuality?" The question hung in the air between us. I told him I hadn't. Not really. But lately, I'd been feeling something I couldn't explain, something that confused me. Marcus moved closer. He said, "I think you know what you're feeling. You're just afraid to admit it." He was right. I was terrified. He reached over and took my hand. The same way Emma had held his hand at the Violet Room. Except this time, I was on the receiving end. And it felt right. We sat there for a long time, not saying anything, just holding hands in the dark. When Emma woke up an hour later and came outside, she found us like that. She stood in the doorway for a moment, then smiled. "I was wondering when you two would figure it out." I asked her what she meant. She sat down across from us and explained that she'd known for months, that she'd seen the way I looked at Marcus, that Marcus had told her weeks ago that he was developing feelings for me, that she'd been facilitating our relationship this entire time because she wanted me to be happy, even if it meant losing me. I felt like the ground had disappeared beneath me. She'd orchestrated all of this, the secret meetings, the reconnection, everything. She'd been setting us up. Emma said she'd started to fall out of love with me over a year ago, that she'd been planning to ask for a divorce but didn't know how. Then Marcus reached out, and she saw an opportunity to give me something she couldn't, to help me find who I really was. She said she'd already started seeing someone else, a woman from her book club, that she'd been waiting for me to figure out my own feelings before she moved forward with her own life. The next morning, Marcus and I sat in my car outside a lawyer's office. Emma had already made an appointment for me, already started the divorce process, already decided how our lives would split apart. I asked Marcus if he knew. He said he suspected, but Emma had only confirmed it 2 weeks ago. He apologized for not telling me sooner, but he also said he didn't regret any of it, that he'd fallen for me the moment we reconnected, that he'd been afraid to act on it because of Emma. But now that she was giving us her blessing, he wanted to see where this could go. I told him I needed time, that this was all happening too fast, that I couldn't just switch from being married to my wife to dating my brother. He said he understood, that he'd wait as long as I needed. But Emma was done waiting. The divorce moved forward quickly. She was generous with the settlement, kept the house, took half the savings, made the whole process as painless as possible. Her girlfriend, Rebecca, was at the final hearing with her. They held hands in the courtroom. Emma looked happier than I'd seen her in years. Marcus sat next to me, quiet and supportive. After the judge signed the papers, Emma hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for letting me go." I wanted to be angry, wanted to feel betrayed, but I couldn't, because she'd given me something I didn't know I needed. She'd given me Marcus. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Marcus moved into my apartment. We started building a life together. It wasn't perfect. We fought about stupid things, about who left dishes in the sink, about whose turn it was to do laundry. Normal couple stuff. But underneath it all was this understanding that we'd both been lost for years, and somehow, through Emma's strange manipulation, we'd found each other. Emma and Rebecca got engaged 6 months later. They invited us to the wedding. Marcus and I went. It was beautiful. Uncomfortable, but beautiful. During the reception, Emma pulled me aside and asked if I was happy. I told her I was, happier than I'd been in years. She smiled and said, "Good, that's all I ever wanted." I asked her if she'd planned this entire thing from the beginning, if she'd orchestrated Marcus reaching out just so she could set us up. She laughed and said, "Does it matter? Maybe it didn't. Maybe the manipulation was worth it if it led us all to where we needed to be. Or maybe Emma had just been looking for an exit strategy and found a convenient one. I'd never know for sure. What I did know was that my life looked nothing like I'd imagined it would. I was dating my estranged brother. My ex-wife was marrying a woman. And somehow, despite all the lies and secrets and manipulation, we'd all ended up better off. Life was smaller now, but fuller, more honest. Marcus and I built something real from the ruins of my marriage. Emma found her truth, and I finally understood mine. The scar of that betrayal would always be there, but scars prove you survived, and sometimes survival looks different than you expected. Story 2. My son joined a radical commune with his manipulative girlfriend and abandoned his newborn at the hospital. Tyler came out to me as gender fluid when he was 16. Some days he felt male, some days neither, some days both. I supported him completely, bought him the clothes he wanted, used whatever pronouns he asked for that day. His therapist said this was healthy exploration and I should just let him figure it out. 2 years later, he announced at dinner that Sage was pregnant. 7 months pregnant. He'd hidden it from me for 7 months because, according to him, I'd failed him by not supporting his transition to fully non-binary earlier. I stared at him across the table trying to process what he'd just said. "You're going to be a grandmother," he told me, except he expected me to raise the baby like it was mine. "This was my responsibility," he said, because my refusal to put him on puberty blockers when he was 14 had led to this pregnancy. The logic made no sense. I asked him to explain how not giving him medical intervention I didn't even know he wanted had resulted in him getting someone pregnant. He said if I'd been a better parent and understood his identity, he never would have been in a position to create a child, that the pregnancy was proof of my failure. I told him congratulations on becoming a father and that he had some serious decisions to make about this baby. I also told him I absolutely would not be raising his child for him. He didn't respond with words, just stood up from the table, grabbed his plate, threw it in the sink where it shattered, and ran upstairs to his room. I heard the door slam and lock, then screaming. Actual screaming like someone was dying. He stayed in there for 14 hours. His room had an attached bathroom, so I knew he wasn't coming out unless he got hungry. Around hour 10, I checked the hallway and noticed his duffel bag was gone. By hour 12, he'd packed clothes through his window, using the emergency ladder from the garage that he'd apparently retrieved at some point. At hour 14, he texted me from a blocked number that he'd already called the police to inform them he was leaving voluntarily and wasn't in danger, like I was going to report a 20-year-old adult as a runaway. The text felt deliberately insulting, designed to make me look like some controlling parent when all I'd done was refuse to raise his child. 3 days later, Tyler texted again, asking to meet at a diner. Public place. Neutral territory. He wanted to discuss terms for the baby. I agreed because, despite everything, he was still my son, and that was still my grandchild. When I arrived, Tyler was sitting in a booth with Sage. I'd met Sage exactly 3 times before this. Once at a birthday party for Tyler when they were 17. Once at graduation. Once at Thanksgiving dinner, where she'd made prolonged eye contact with me while describing in graphic detail how she and Tyler had sex. Just stared at me across the turkey and mashed potatoes, describing positions and sounds, while my sister choked on her wine and my brother-in-law excused himself to the bathroom. I'd asked her to stop, and she'd laughed, said I was being uptight, and continued until I told her to leave my house. Tyler had defended her, said I was being judgmental and sex-negative. Now she was sitting across from me 7 months pregnant, and I was supposed to have a civil conversation about their baby. Sage did most of the talking. Tyler sat next to her, nodding along, occasionally squeezing her hand for emphasis. Her points were as follows. 1. I'd poisoned Tyler by forcing him to use birth control when we both knew he identified as non-binary and shouldn't have been having penetrative sex anyway. Except I'd never forced him to do anything. I'd helped him get a prescription for condoms when he was 17 because he asked for them. 2. It would take years to undo the damage I'd caused by not affirming Tyler's identity earlier and getting him proper hormones. Damage that somehow included this pregnancy, though the logic still escaped me. 3. I was continuing to abuse Tyler by refusing to take care of his baby, while he and Sage worked on themselves and built their new community. The word community came up 6 times in her 20-minute monologue. Their community. The new community. Building community. Community values. I asked what community she was referring to, and she smiled this slow smile that made my skin crawl. She said they'd found their true family, people who understood gender liberation and weren't trapped by societal expectations of parenthood, people who were building something new. Sage slammed her hand on the table twice during this conversation. Tyler flinched both times but kept nodding along. Our waiter stopped coming to the table after the first slam. I asked why they couldn't just take care of the baby themselves, and Sage laughed. Actually laughed. She said her parents had kicked her out months ago, that she was staying in a community space with 11 other people, that traditional nuclear family structures were oppressive, and that their baby deserved better than the heteronormative prison I'd tried to trap Tyler in. I pointed out that I'd supported Tyler's gender identity completely and never once pushed traditional anything on him. She said support wasn't enough, that I should have known what he needed before he even asked, that good parents anticipate their children's needs, and I'd failed at that fundamental level. Tyler sat there the entire time not making eye contact with me, just staring at the table or at Sage, nodding whenever she made a point. I asked him directly if this was what he wanted, if he really believed I'd failed him this badly. He looked at me for the first time in 20 minutes and said yes, said I'd never understood him, said this baby was my chance to make up for all my mistakes. I told them both I would not be raising their child. That adoption was an option if they truly couldn't parent. Sage's face went cold. She leaned forward and said, if I refused to take the baby, they'd make sure I never saw it. Ever. That I'd be cut off completely from my grandchild. Tyler nodded along to this threat like it was reasonable, like holding a baby hostage to punish me made perfect sense in their worldview. I left the diner and drove home, shaking. For 3 weeks, I heard nothing. No texts, no calls. Tyler had blocked me again. I tried reaching out through his old friends from high school, but none of them had heard from him either. One friend, Marcus, told me he'd run into Tyler downtown and barely recognized him. Said Tyler looked thin, dirty, wearing clothes that didn't fit right. Said Sage was with him and seemed to be doing all the talking while Tyler just stood there looking at the ground. Marcus said he'd tried to chat, but Sage had pulled Tyler away, said they were late for a meeting. Then one afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find Tyler sitting on my porch, 8 months pregnant now. I didn't recognize him at first. His face was covered in small tattoos, stick-and-poke designs that looked infected around the edges. His hair was matted and unwashed. He smelled like he hadn't showered in weeks. When he stood up, I could see how thin he'd gotten everywhere except his stomach. Arms like sticks, legs swimming in pants held up with rope instead of a belt. He chattered at me nonstop while I fumbled with my keys, asking why I'd locked him out, saying he just needed to stay for a few days until the baby came, talking so fast I couldn't get a word in to tell him I'd changed the locks after he left, because I didn't know if Sage had copies. I let him inside because he was my son and he was pregnant, and I wasn't going to turn away someone about to give birth regardless of our issues. He went straight to the bathroom, and I heard the shower running for 45 minutes. When he came out, he looked slightly better, but his eyes were wrong, pupils dilated too wide. Talking even faster now, pacing my living room, gesturing wildly while describing this community he and Sage had built. 11 core members living in an abandoned warehouse downtown. They'd found the space through someone Sage knew, fixed it up themselves. No running water, but they had a camping shower set up. They'd tapped into the building's old electrical system illegally, created living spaces with hanging sheets and salvaged furniture. Sage was the center of everything, Tyler explained. She understood what they were all becoming. The next generation, post-gender, post-family, post-society. They were building new people, Tyler said, people who would exist outside all the systems that had failed them. He said this while eating everything in my refrigerator without cleaning up after himself. Cheese wrappers on the counter, milk jug left out, bread bag open and spilling crumbs. I asked about the baby's due date and got 5 different answers over 2 days. First, it was mid-June, then late June, then early July. Then he didn't remember exactly. Then Sage would know, and he'd ask her later. I asked if he'd been to a doctor for prenatal care, and he said yes, everything was fine, the baby was healthy. Later, I'd find out this was a complete lie. He hadn't seen a doctor once during the entire pregnancy. I asked if he planned to keep the baby or pursue adoption, and he couldn't give me a straight answer. Sometimes he talked about raising the child in the community, teaching it to be free of gender constraints from birth. Sometimes he talked about placing it with a family who would spread their message, like missionary work, but with babies. Nothing he said made coherent sense. Every topic he started would spiral into something else before finishing. Sage's wisdom, the community's purpose, the new people they were creating, how some of them were empathic and could communicate feelings through dreams, how gender was a prison and they were all escaping, how the baby would be born free in ways we couldn't understand because we were still trapped in the old world. As a house guest, he was unbearable. Didn't flush the toilet after using it most of the time. Didn't shower unless I reminded him. Ate everything without replacing anything or cleaning up. Demanded I take him to restaurants daily. Not asked. Demanded. With this entitled tone like I owed him meals for existing. I took him twice because I missed my son and kept hoping I'd see glimpses of who he used to be. But the person sitting across from me at those restaurants wasn't Tyler. This person talked non-stop about Sage and the community and their grand purpose while barely touching his food. Picked at fries and left half his burger untouched while talking about the collective consciousness they were building. After the second restaurant trip, I took him to the store to get baby supplies. He wandered the aisles in a daze, picking up the first thing he saw without reading labels or comparing prices. Grabbed newborn diapers, even though those only last 2 weeks. Grabbed the smallest pack of wipes, grabbed 1 can of formula. The whole time talking about his true family back at the warehouse and how they were waiting for him to return with the baby so they could all raise it together in their new way. I finally managed to pin down that he expected the baby in mid-July. That gave us 3 weeks. 3 weeks of him living in my house, not cleaning up after himself, demanding food and transportation, talking in circles about the community and Sage and their revolutionary purpose. I asked him directly where Sage was during all this, why she wasn't here if they were such partners. He said she was holding down the community space, that someone had to maintain the center while he prepared for the birth, that she trusted him to handle this part because they had that level of connection. The more he talked, the more obvious it became that Sage was controlling every aspect of his life. What he thought, what he believed, who he could talk to, when he could come home. Everything filtered through her perspective. I asked if he'd talked to his old therapist recently, and he said therapists were part of the system designed to keep people compliant. That Sage had shown him how therapy was actually a tool of oppression. That real healing came from the community, not from licensed professionals who didn't understand their purpose. 2 weeks into his stay, he went into labor. Early. At 3 a.m, I heard him screaming from his old bedroom. When I ran in, he was doubled over holding his stomach, water all over the floor. I grabbed my keys and got him to the hospital in 12 minutes, running every red light. In the emergency room, they asked him standard intake questions. Last prenatal visit. OB's name. Due date. He couldn't answer any of them, just kept screaming about pain and how they needed to help him now. The nurses looked at each other with this expression I recognized. The expression that said this was going to be complicated. They got him into a room and started running tests. That's when everything came out. No prenatal care, no doctor visits, no ultrasounds, nothing. High-risk pregnancy. They admitted him immediately and started IV fluids because he was dehydrated, started monitoring the baby's heartbeat, which was irregular, started prepping for potential complications because they had no medical history to work with. In the hospital room, Tyler transformed. The chatty, eager-to-please person from my house disappeared. In his place was someone cruel, someone who screamed at nurses that they were poisoning him with their medicines. Someone who called them every vile name you can imagine when they tried to check his vitals. Someone who declared himself their queen and demanded they bow before touching him. Someone who accused them of trying to punish him for being free of gender when they were literally just trying to deliver his baby safely. The nurses remained professional through all of it. Calm voices, gentle explanations, patient redirection when he started spiraling into delusions. I pulled one nurse aside in the hallway and told her everything. The warehouse, the community, Sage, the lack of prenatal care, my suspicion that he was on drugs even though I had no proof. She thanked me for the information and said they'd run a full panel. I asked if she thought he was manic or bipolar or something, because this behavior wasn't normal. She couldn't speculate officially, but suggested I speak with the social worker on staff. The social worker met with me in a small office near the nurses' station. I told her everything. Tyler's behavior changes over the past months, his sudden devotion to Sage, the community in the warehouse, the delusions about being royalty and having special powers, the way he couldn't focus on one topic, the cruelty toward hospital staff. She took notes and said she'd document everything for the file, asked if I had any contact information for Sage or the community. I didn't. Asked if I knew the baby's other parent. I explained that Tyler had used a sperm donor through Sage's connections, though I had no documentation of this. Everything about this pregnancy had been hidden from me until it was too late to intervene. She nodded and said CPS would likely get involved given the circumstances. That safe surrender was an option if Tyler chose not to parent. That they'd support whatever decision he made, but the baby's safety came first. Tyler's blood work came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing. I was stunned. I'd been so certain he was on something based on his behavior. The constant talking, the dilated pupils, the rapid mood swings. The nurse explained that mental health crises can present exactly like drug intoxication, that whatever was happening with Tyler was psychological, not chemical. I asked what they thought was wrong with him, and she said the doctor would discuss it after the birth. That right now, they needed to focus on delivering the baby safely. I wasn't allowed in the delivery room. Tyler screamed at me to get out when I tried to stay. Said he didn't want me there. Didn't need me there. The only person he wanted was Sage, and she wouldn't come. I'd tried calling the one number Tyler had given me weeks ago for emergencies. The person who answered said Sage was unavailable. Said the community didn't believe in hospital births. Said Tyler knew what he was doing by going there and had to face those consequences alone. Then hung up. So I sat in the waiting room for 6 hours while my son gave birth without any support person present. The baby was born healthy, 7 pounds. Good weight considering the lack of prenatal care. Normal delivery, no complications. A girl. Tyler hadn't wanted to know the gender beforehand. Said gender was a social construct and they'd let the baby decide who they were later. The nurses brought her to the nursery and gave her formula since Tyler had no interest in trying to breastfeed. I asked if I could see her, and they said I could look through the window but couldn't hold her without Tyler's permission. I stood there staring at this tiny person through the glass, my granddaughter, while trying to process that her father had just abandoned her. Because that's exactly what Tyler did. 6 hours after giving birth, while I was in the cafeteria getting coffee, he got dressed and walked out of the hospital. No discharge paperwork, no signing forms, no talking to the social worker, just left. The nurse called me back to the floor and asked if I knew where he went. I didn't. I called Tyler's phone. Blocked. I called the community number. Disconnected. I drove to the warehouse address he'd mentioned. Empty. Either he'd given me the wrong location or they'd already cleared out. The social worker explained that because Tyler had given birth at a safe surrender site, he wouldn't be charged with abandonment. The hospital would place the baby with emergency foster care while they searched for family members willing to take custody. She asked if I wanted to be considered. I wanted to say yes. Wanted to take my granddaughter home and give her the life Tyler clearly couldn't provide. But I also knew I couldn't. I was 62 years old, already raised one child who'd turned out like this. Didn't have the energy or resources to raise another. Didn't trust myself to do better the second time. So I said no. Said I'd stay involved if the foster family allowed it, but I couldn't be a full-time parent again. The social worker understood. Said lots of grandparents make that choice, and it doesn't make them bad people. That sometimes the best thing you can do for a child is recognize your limitations. I went home that night to an empty house. Tyler's things were still scattered around his old bedroom. The baby supplies we'd bought together still in bags in the corner. I sat on his bed and cried for the first time since this whole nightmare started. Cried for my son who'd disappeared into some cult. Cried for my granddaughter who'd never know her father. Cried for myself because I'd somehow failed so completely that we'd ended up here. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Tyler. Handwritten on notebook paper. Said he wasn't sorry for leaving. Said the baby was better off without him because he wasn't meant to be a parent in the traditional sense. Said he and Sage were building something bigger than family, bigger than society's expectations. Said I'd never understand because I was still trapped in old ways of thinking. Said he'd probably have more children soon because spreading the new people was their mission. Said he loved me but couldn't have me in his life while I remained closed-minded. The letter had no return address. I haven't heard from him since. That was 8 months ago. My granddaughter is in foster care with a family who's considering adoption. I get monthly updates through the social worker. She's healthy, meeting all her milestones, happy. The foster parents send photos sometimes, though they're not required to. In the pictures, she's smiling. She looks like Tyler did when he was a baby, before everything went wrong. I keep those photos in a box in my closet because looking at them hurts too much. I started going to therapy to process everything. The therapist says I need to grieve the son I had and accept that he may never come back. That people in cults sometimes return to their families after months or years, but sometimes they don't. That I can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. She's right, but it doesn't make it easier. I'm angry at Tyler for being cruel to those nurses, for abandoning his daughter, for choosing Sage and that community over his family. I'm sad that I couldn't protect him from whatever this is. I'm scared he's in danger, but powerless to help. Mostly, I'm confused about where I went wrong, what I should have seen earlier, what I could have done differently. The therapist says I can't think like that Tyler made his own choices as an adult, that mental illness and manipulation are complicated, that I did the best I could with the information I had. Sometimes I drive past the old warehouse address just to check if there's any sign of them. It's always empty. Chain-link fence, broken windows, no evidence anyone ever lived there. I wonder if the whole community story was real or just another delusion. Wonder if Sage exists or if she's a composite of different people Tyler met. Wonder if I'll ever know the truth. My granddaughter will grow up without knowing where she came from, without knowing her father's name or her family history. The foster parents know the basics, but not the details. They don't know about the community or the delusions or the cruelty at the hospital. They just know Tyler couldn't parent and I couldn't take custody. Maybe that's better. Maybe she deserves a clean start without all this baggage. I hope she has a good life. Hope she never wonders too much about why her father left. Hope she finds a family who loves her unconditionally in ways I apparently failed to do with Tyler. That's what keeps me up at night. The thought that I failed my son so badly that he ended up in a cult, abandoned his child, and disappeared. The thought that I'll do it again if given another chance. The therapist says that's not how it works, that I'm not responsible for Tyler's choices, that loving someone doesn't guarantee they'll make good decisions. She's probably right. But it doesn't change the fact that my house is empty, my son is gone, and my granddaughter is growing up with strangers. Life got smaller after all this, quieter, lonelier, but maybe that's what I deserve for whatever I did wrong along the way. Story 3. I'm straight, but I fell in love with my lesbian roommate. She handed me a potted succulent for my promotion, and my heart did something it had never done before. 3 weeks living together, and Maya was making breakfast in our kitchen wearing my old college hoodie. I stared at the way her dark hair fell across her shoulders while she hummed along to some indie song I didn't know. My coffee got cold in my hand because I forgot to drink it. We'd been friends since sophomore year. She came out as a lesbian junior year at a house party, told everyone matter-of-factly while holding a red Solo cup, and nobody made it weird. I'd dated guys exclusively my entire life, had a boyfriend for 2 years in college, another one for 6 months after graduation, never questioned my sexuality once, never looked at a woman and felt anything beyond platonic appreciation. Maya was just my friend who happened to like women. That was her thing, not mine. But living together changed something. Small things I didn't notice at first. The way I'd lean closer when she explained something. How I started wearing perfume on days we'd hang out at home. The night we watched a thriller and I grabbed her arm during a jump scare, then didn't let go for the rest of the movie. She didn't pull away either. Just let my hand stay there on her forearm while my pulse hammered against my wrist. After the movie ended, we sat in silence for too long. She stood up first, said goodnight, went to her room. I stayed on the couch staring at my hand like it belonged to someone else. I avoided her for 3 days after that, took extra shifts at work, left early in the mornings, came home late. She texted me asking if everything was okay, and I felt my stomach flip when I saw her name on my screen. Told her work was crazy busy and I'd make it up to her soon. She sent back a heart emoji. Just one small digital heart, and I stared at it for 10 minutes trying to figure out what it meant. This was ridiculous. I was 26 years old acting like a teenager with a crush. Except I didn't have crushes on women. I liked men. Always. Had. This was just some weird phase because we lived together, and she was attractive, and I was probably just lonely after my last breakup. The following week I came home to find dinner already cooked. Maya had made my favorite pasta dish, the one with sun-dried tomatoes and goat cheese that I'd mentioned once in passing 3 months ago. She remembered. Set the table with actual placemats and candles. Not romantic candles, just the vanilla ones from Target. But still. We ate together and talked about our days, and I watched the way the candlelight made her eyes look almost gold. She'd done laundry too. My clothes folded in a neat stack on my bed when I went to change later. The gesture felt significant in a way I couldn't name. Nobody had ever just done my laundry without being asked. My ex-boyfriend wouldn't even put his own clothes away half the time. Next morning, she walked into my room while I was getting dressed for work. Not all the way in, just stood in the doorway holding a travel mug. "Made you coffee," she said. "The way you like it. 2 creams, no sugar." I was standing there in my bra and work pants, and she didn't look away immediately. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds before she handed me the mug and left. I sat on my bed holding the still warm cup and tried to figure out what was happening to me. At work, I couldn't focus. Every task took twice as long because my brain kept replaying small moments. Maya laughing at something I said. Maya touching my shoulder when she walked past me in the kitchen. Maya asking if I wanted to watch a movie later with this hopeful tone in her voice. My coworker Jenna asked if I was okay during lunch. Told her I was fine, just distracted. She didn't buy it. Pressed me until I admitted I might have feelings for my roommate. Jenna's face lit up like I'd just told her the best gossip. She asked what he was like and I corrected her. My roommate's a woman. Jenna's expression shifted, but not in a bad way. More surprised than anything. She asked if I was bi, and I said I didn't know. I'd never been attracted to women before, never even considered it as a possibility. But Maya made me feel things I'd only felt with men before. The butterflies, the constant checking my phone, the wanting to be near her all the time. Jenna told me to just talk to Maya about it, but I couldn't imagine that conversation going well. That weekend, we went to the beach with our friend group. Maya wore this black one-piece swimsuit that made my brain stop working properly. I kept catching myself staring and had to force my eyes elsewhere. In the water, she swam over to me and splashed me playfully. I splashed back. We ended up in this stupid splash fight like kids while our friends watched from the shore. She grabbed my wrist to stop me from splashing her again, and we were suddenly very close. Water dripping down both our faces, her hand warm on my skin. She let go quickly and swam away laughing, but something had shifted. I felt it. Wondered if she felt it too. Back at the apartment that night, I took a long shower and thought about Maya the entire time. This wasn't going away. Whatever this was, ignoring it hadn't worked. Avoiding her hadn't worked. I needed to figure out what I was feeling and why. In my room later, I Googled things I'd never Googled before. Am I bi if I'm only attracted to one woman? Can you be straight and fall for your female friend? Sexuality spectrum. Compulsory heterosexuality. The rabbit hole went deep, and nothing gave me clear answers. Just more questions, more confusion, more realization that maybe I'd never been as straight as I thought I was. Monday evening, Maya made dinner again. Said she enjoyed cooking, and it was easier to make food for two than just herself. We ate on the couch this time, watching some reality show neither of us really cared about. I noticed how close we were sitting, how our legs were almost touching. She shifted slightly and her knee pressed against mine. I didn't move away, neither did she. The contact felt electric. After dinner, she asked if I wanted to watch a movie in her room since her TV was bigger. I said yes, even though our TVs were the same size. Her room smelled like lavender and something else I couldn't identify, some scent that was just distinctly Maya. We sat on her bed with pillows propped up behind us. Halfway through the movie, she rested her head on my shoulder. Casual, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My heart was beating so hard I was sure she could hear it. When the movie ended, neither of us moved. She lifted her head and looked at me, and I looked back at her, and the air between us felt heavy with something unspoken. I should have said something, should have addressed whatever was happening. Instead, I just said goodnight and went to my room. Lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering why I was such a coward. I liked her, clearly liked her, and based on the way she'd been acting, maybe she liked me too. But saying it out loud felt impossible, felt like crossing some line I couldn't uncross. The next few weeks were torture. We kept dancing around each other, getting close but not too close, touching but not too much, having these intense moments of eye contact that lasted too long. Our friends started noticing, asked why we were acting weird. We both denied it, said everything was fine, but everything was not fine. I was falling in love with my lesbian roommate and had no idea what to do about it. I started leaving her little notes around the apartment, stupid things like, "Hope you have a good day," or "Thanks for being an amazing roommate." She'd text me photos of the notes with smiley faces, started leaving me notes back, more personal ones. "You make me laugh more than anyone," or "I'm glad we're friends with friends," underlined 3 times like she was emphasizing something. I began planning our time together around things she liked instead of just what I wanted. Suggested we watch the art house films she was into instead of the action movies I preferred. Took her to this indie bookstore she'd mentioned wanting to visit. Got her favorite Thai food delivered when she had a bad day at work. She noticed, commented on how thoughtful I'd been lately, asked if I was okay. I told her I was better than okay, that living with her had made me happier than I'd been in years. She smiled this small smile that made my chest ache and said she felt the same way. One Saturday night we stayed home instead of going out with friends. Made cocktails in our kitchen, strong ones that tasted like juice but weren't. We ended up on the couch again, closer than usual, both a little tipsy. She asked me about my dating history, asked why my last relationship ended. I told her the truth, that I'd never felt passionate about any of the guys I dated, that something always felt missing, that I'd thought maybe I just wasn't a romantic person. She asked if I still thought that. I looked at her and said no. Said I'd recently discovered I was capable of feeling very passionate about someone. She asked who, and I couldn't say it. Just looked at her and hoped she understood. Her expression changed. Soft, uncertain, hopeful. She asked if I meant her, and I nodded. Couldn't speak. Just nodded. She told me she'd been attracted to me since junior year of college, that she'd never said anything because I was straight, that moving in together had been torture because she got to be near me all the time, but couldn't act on her feelings, that she'd been leaving me notes and cooking for me and trying to show me how she felt without actually saying it because she was terrified of ruining our friendship. I asked why she didn't think I might feel the same way, and she laughed, said I'd never shown interest in women before, never even mentioned finding a woman attractive. She'd assumed I was completely straight, and her feelings were one-sided. I told her she was wrong, that I'd been losing my mind for weeks trying to figure out what I was feeling, that I'd never been attracted to women before, but I was definitely attracted to her, that I didn't know what label to use, but I knew I wanted her. She kissed me then, slow and gentle, like she was giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't want to. Kissed her back and felt something click into place. This was what had been missing, this feeling, this connection. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. She asked if I was sure about this, said she didn't want me to wake up tomorrow and regret it. I told her the only thing I'd regret was not doing this sooner. We kissed again. Longer this time. Her hands in my hair, my hands on her waist. Everything felt right in a way nothing ever had before. We spent that whole night talking about what this meant, about labels and sexuality in the future. I told her I didn't know if I was bi or pan or just Maya-sexual, but I knew I wanted to be with her. She said that was enough for her, that we could figure out the rest as we went. She asked if I wanted to tell people, and I said yes, that I wasn't going to hide us. She smiled and kissed me again, and we fell asleep in her bed tangled together. Woke up the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window. She was already awake, watching me with this soft expression, asked if I still felt the same in daylight. I kissed her instead of answering, and that seemed to satisfy her. We told our friends that week. Most of them weren't surprised, said they'd seen it coming from a mile away. One friend admitted she'd had a bet going about when we'd finally get together. My parents took it harder, not because I was with a woman, but because I'd never mentioned being interested in women before. Took them a few weeks to adjust, but they came around. Asked to meet Maya properly, even though they'd met her before as my friend. This time was different. This time, she was my girlfriend. That word felt strange at first. Girlfriend. But it fit. She was my girlfriend, and I was hers, and that was that. Living together as a couple was easier than I expected. We already knew each other's habits, already had our routines. The only difference now was we kissed in the kitchen while making breakfast, held hands on the couch during movies, slept in the same bed instead of separate rooms. Sometimes, I still couldn't believe this was my life. That I'd gone from thinking I was straight to being in love with a woman in the span of a few months. Maya asked me once if I regretted not figuring it out sooner, if I wished I'd known I was attracted to women back in college. I told her no, that I wouldn't change anything because this path led me to her, to us. That was all that mattered. Year later, we're still together, still living in the same apartment, still learning about each other every day. She taught me that sexuality is fluid, that labels are useful but not required, that love doesn't care about gender when you find the right person. I'm grateful I had a best friend who became my partner. Grateful I was brave enough to take the risk. Grateful she felt the same way. Sometimes the best relationships start with friendship, with trust already built, with knowing someone deeply before romance enters the picture. That's what we have, what we built together, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. Story 4. My bipolar roommate's boyfriend kept triggering my episodes until I caught him on camera. The maintenance guy changed our apartment locks while Devin stood on the sidewalk screaming that I'd stolen his girlfriend. His girlfriend. My roommate Amber. The woman who'd been my best friend since freshman year and who was now convinced I was having psychotic breaks because her boyfriend kept whispering threats when she wasn't around. The locksmith asked if we needed him to call the cops, and I said no, Just finish the job. Devon's voice carried up 3 floors, promising this wasn't over. I have bipolar disorder. Type 1. Diagnosed at 19 after a manic episode that landed me in the hospital for a week. Been stable on medication for 4 years. Regular therapy, regular psychiatrist visits, blood tests every 3 months to monitor my lithium levels. I'd built a careful, structured life around managing my condition. Then Amber started dating Devon 6 months ago, and everything went to hell. The first time it happened, I was alone in the apartment studying for midterms. Heard someone whisper my name from the hallway, clear as day. My name in this low, menacing tone. I looked up and Devon was standing in my doorway. Asked him what he said. He smiled and told me he didn't say anything. Asked if I was feeling okay. The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but something about his expression was wrong. Too pleased. Too knowing. I told him I must have misheard something and went back to studying. He lingered in the doorway for another 30 seconds just watching me before walking away. Started happening more frequently after that. Always when Amber wasn't around. Devon would be in the kitchen, and I'd hear whispers coming from behind me. Turn around and he'd be standing there looking concerned, asking if I was all right. Or I'd be in my room and hear muttering outside my door. Open it to find Devon in the hallway claiming he'd just gotten home and hadn't said a word. Each time he'd ask about my medication. Ask if I'd talked to my doctor recently. Suggest maybe my dosages needed adjusting. The whispers were always just clear enough to hear, but never clear enough to understand. Just my name. Or fragments of sentences. Or this low laughing sound that made my skin crawl. 3 months into their relationship, I had my first breakdown. Woke up at 2 a.m. to whispers outside my bedroom door. Loud whispers. Urgent whispers. Opened my door, and Devon was standing right there, 6 inches from my door in the middle of the night, whispering. He jumped back, startled, and asked what I was doing up. I asked what he was doing outside my room, whispering. He looked confused. Said he'd gotten up to use the bathroom and hadn't said a word. Said maybe I'd been dreaming. I went back to bed but couldn't sleep. Lay there telling myself it wasn't real, that my medication was working, that this was just stress from school. But the doubt crept in, the familiar fear that I was losing control again. 2 weeks later, second breakdown. Worse than the first. Devon had moved in by then, officially living in our apartment, sleeping in Amber's room, everywhere all the time. The whispers escalated, multiple times a day now, in the kitchen while I cooked, in the living room while I watched TV, in my room late at night, always when Amber was at work or class, always just Devon and me. I finally broke down and told Amber everything, told her I thought Devon was whispering at me deliberately, that every time I heard it, he was nearby, that it only happened when she wasn't around. Her face did this thing. This sympathetic, worried thing that told me she didn't believe me at all. She said Devon would never do something like that he cared about me and was worried about my mental health, that maybe the stress of their relationship moving so fast had triggered something, that maybe I needed to talk to my psychiatrist about adjusting my meds. Every word felt like a dismissal, like she'd already decided I was unstable and nothing I said would change her mind. I asked her to just watch him, to pay attention to how he acted when I was around. She agreed, but I could tell she was humoring me, treating me like I was fragile, like I might break if she disagreed too directly. My psychiatrist increased my lithium dosage, added an antipsychotic, said auditory hallucinations weren't typical for bipolar disorder but could happen during severe episodes, asked if I'd been sleeping enough, eating regularly, managing my stress. I answered yes to everything because I had been. I was doing everything right, following every protocol, taking every pill, attending every appointment. But the whispers continued. The medication changes did nothing. If anything, they made me feel worse, more drowsy, more disconnected, more uncertain about what was real. I started watching Devon obsessively, noting every time he muttered to himself, every time he paused mid-sentence like he was listening to something, every time he stood too close or lingered too long. Amber noticed, asked why I was staring at her boyfriend so much, why I seemed so fixated on proving he was doing something wrong. I tried to explain, but my explanations sounded paranoid even to me. She suggested maybe I needed more intensive treatment, maybe inpatient care for a few weeks. The suggestion felt like betrayal, like she was giving up on me, choosing him over me. We had this massive fight about it. She said I was making her choose between her boyfriend and her roommate, that she loved me but couldn't live like this anymore, that my accusations were hurting Devin and putting strain on their relationship. I said he was gaslighting me deliberately, that he was trying to make me think I was crazy, that she was enabling him by refusing to see it. She cried, said this was exactly what she was afraid of, that my paranoia was destroying our friendship. We didn't speak for 3 days after that. I decided to gather evidence, started paying closer attention to when the whispers happened, started trying to catch him in the act. One evening, Amber was at her mom's for dinner. Devin and I were alone in the apartment. I heard whispers coming from the kitchen, walked in, and Devin was standing by the sink muttering to himself. He saw me and stopped abruptly, asked if I needed something. I asked what he'd been saying. He claimed he was just humming along to a song in his head, but there was no music playing. The apartment was silent except for his muttering. Started recording things on my phone. Nothing concrete at first. Just videos of Devin talking to himself or pausing in weird ways. Showed them to Amber and she said everyone talks to themselves sometimes, that I was reading too much into normal behavior, that I needed to stop trying to build a case against her boyfriend and focus on my own health. Her dismissal stung, made me feel crazy, made me question whether I was actually experiencing this or whether my mind was creating patterns that weren't there. One night, I needed a shower desperately. The whispers had been constant all evening and I was exhausted. Went to the bathroom and set my phone on the counter to play music. Forgot I'd opened the voice recorder app earlier, left it running by accident, sat in the shower for 20 minutes trying to calm down. The whispers started again while I was in there, clear and persistent right outside the bathroom door. My heart rate spiked. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to remind myself that whether the whispers were real or not, panicking wouldn't help. Got out of the shower and grabbed my phone. Realized the voice recorder had been running the entire time, almost deleted it, then decided to listen just in case. The recording captured everything, the bathroom door creaking, the shower running, then the whispers. Devin's voice low and deliberate right outside the door. Crazy bitch, fucking psycho, nobody believes you, nobody will ever believe you. Over and over. Crystal clear on the recording, unmistakable. I played it back 5 times to make sure I wasn't hearing things, but it was there. Proof. I felt this rush of vindication and rage at the same time. I wasn't crazy. He'd been doing this deliberately, all of it, for months. I saved the recording immediately, made backup copies, sent it to my email. I needed more, though. One recording might not be enough. Amber might claim it was doctored or taken out of context. I spent the next week recording constantly. Left my phone running in my room during the day, set up my laptop to record in the living room, captured hours of footage, got multiple recordings of Devin whispering when he thought I couldn't hear, muttering about how unstable I was, how nobody would believe me, how Amber was starting to see how crazy I really was. One recording caught him on the phone with someone bragging about how easy it was to mess with the bipolar roommate, how Amber trusted him completely and would never take my side. How much fun he was having watching me unravel. His voice was gleeful, proud, like he was describing a particularly clever prank instead of psychological torture. Once I had enough evidence, I showed Amber. Sat her down one evening when Devin was at work. Told her I had something important to show her. She looked exhausted before I even started, like she was bracing herself for another accusation. I played the bathroom recording first, watched her face change from skepticism to confusion to horror as she heard her boyfriend's voice saying those things. Then I played the others. The phone call, the muttering in the kitchen, the whispers outside my bedroom door. By the time I finished, she was pale and shaking. She asked if I was sure these were real, if I'd edited them somehow. I told her to check the metadata, check the timestamps, look at the raw files. Everything was authentic. She took my phone and listened to each recording again. Started crying somewhere around the 3rd one, asked why he would do this, what he could possibly gain from it. I told her I didn't know, that I'd been asking myself the same question for months, that maybe he just enjoyed the power, maybe he wanted to isolate her from me, maybe he was just a sadistic asshole who got off on hurting people. We decided to confront him together, waited until he got home from work, asked him to sit down in the living room. Amber started by saying we needed to talk about something serious. Devin looked between us, confused, playing innocent already. She told him we had recordings of him whispering at me. His expression didn't change, just this blank neutrality that felt rehearsed. He asked what she was talking about. Amber played the bathroom recording, the one where his voice was clearest. Devin's composure cracked, just for a second. This micro-expression of panic before he smoothed his face back into confusion. He claimed it wasn't him, that the voice on the recording didn't sound like him, that I must have edited it or gotten someone to fake his voice. Amber played another recording, then another. His denials got weaker, his explanations more elaborate. Finally, she played the phone call, the one where he bragged about messing with me. Silence. He sat there staring at her phone, unable to come up with an excuse. Then he tried a different approach, said he'd only done it because he was worried about me, that he'd read about bipolar disorder and knew people could become dangerous during episodes, that he'd been trying to trigger a breakdown so I'd get more intensive treatment before I hurt someone, that everything he'd done was to protect Amber from me. The logic was insane, twisted, but he said it with such conviction, like he genuinely believed he was the hero in this situation. Amber asked if he understood how much damage he'd caused, how much pain. He said he'd been trying to help, that if I couldn't handle a little stress, I shouldn't be living without supervision anyway. Called me unstable, dangerous, said I was manipulating Amber against him now, that this was exactly the kind of behavior he'd been warning her about. She told him to stop, told him his excuses were unacceptable, that what he'd done was abuse, that he needed to leave. Devin's whole demeanor changed. The fake concern disappeared, replaced with anger. He accused Amber of choosing her crazy roommate over him, said she was being manipulated, that I'd probably faked the recordings or coached her into believing them. His voice got louder, more aggressive. Amber stood her ground, told him he had until the end of the day to pack his things and get out. Devin stood up fast enough that his chair fell over, said we'd both regret this, that I was dangerous and Amber was stupid for not seeing it. Stormed off to Amber's room. We could hear him throwing things around, slamming drawers, making as much noise as possible. Amber was shaking. I asked if she wanted me to call the cops. She said no, said she just wanted him gone. We waited in the living room while he packed. Took him 2 hours. He kept coming out to grab more stuff and making comments each time, calling me names, telling Amber she was making a huge mistake, that I'd turn on her next, that people like me couldn't be trusted. Each comment was designed to hurt, to plant doubt, to make Amber question her decision. When he finally finished packing, he stood in the doorway with all his bags, looked at both of us like we'd personally victimized him, told Amber she'd be sorry, told me I was a psychotic bitch who belonged in a hospital. Then he left. Slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. We sat in silence for a long time after, both processing what had just happened. Amber apologized, said she should have believed me sooner, that she'd let her feelings for him blind her to what he was doing. I told her it wasn't her fault, that Devin was good at manipulation, that he'd deliberately exploited my diagnosis to make me seem unreliable. But Devin wasn't done. He started calling and texting constantly. When Amber blocked his number, he showed up at the apartment, buzzed our intercom for an hour straight, demanding to talk to her. When we didn't answer, he started yelling from the sidewalk, saying Amber was being controlled by her crazy roommate, that I'd brainwashed her, that she needed to wake up and see what I really was. Our neighbors called the cops twice. Each time Devin would leave before they arrived, then come back an hour later. This went on for 3 days. We couldn't leave the apartment without him following us, couldn't sleep without hearing him shouting outside our window. Finally got a restraining order, took the recordings to the police along with documentation of his harassment. They issued a temporary order pending a hearing. Devin violated it within 6 hours, showed up at Amber's work demanding to see her. Security called the police. He got arrested, spent the night in jail. That seemed to slow him down. The calls and texts stopped. The showing up stopped. But I kept waiting for him to escalate again, kept checking over my shoulder, kept jumping at unexpected sounds. My psychiatrist helped me process everything, confirmed that what Devin did was deliberate psychological abuse, that my response had been completely appropriate, that maintaining my stability through all of it showed incredible resilience. She reduced my medications back to baseline levels since the hallucinations had stopped completely after Devon left. Said auditory hallucinations in bipolar disorder were rare but could be triggered by severe stress or trauma. That my brain had been trying to warn me something was wrong even when I didn't have concrete proof. Amber went to therapy too, worked through guilt about not believing me sooner, about choosing a partner over a friend, about missing all the red flags. Our friendship survived, but it was different now, more cautious. We had to rebuild trust. She moved out 3 months later, said she needed space to work on herself, needed to not be reminded of Devon every time she looked at our apartment. I understood, got a new roommate through a friend, someone stable and boring who worked night shifts and was barely home. The whole experience left scars. I'm more paranoid now, more guarded, question people's intentions constantly, have trouble trusting my own perceptions even though I know I was right about Devon. My psychiatrist says that's normal, that healing from psychological abuse takes time, that I'm allowed to be angry and hurt and suspicious, that those feelings don't make me unstable, they make me human, someone who went through something terrible and survived it. Devon's restraining order is permanent now. The judge heard the recordings at the hearing and was appalled, called his behavior calculated and malicious, said anyone capable of that kind of systematic psychological abuse posed a continued threat. Devon tried to argue, tried to say I'd manipulated everyone. The judge shut him down, told him to get therapy and stay away from us for life. Last I heard, he moved to a different city. Amber changed her number and blocked him on everything. I still have nightmares sometimes, dreams where I hear whispers and can't tell if they're real. Wake up in a panic checking my phone for recordings. But the nightmares are getting less frequent. The panic attacks are manageable. I'm building a life that feels safe again. Smaller maybe, more careful, but mine. Living with mental illness means constantly questioning your own reality, means people can use your diagnosis as a weapon against you, means you have to fight twice as hard to be believed. Devon knew that, exploited it deliberately, counted on everyone dismissing me as unstable. Almost worked. Would have worked if I hadn't gotten proof. That's what keeps me angry. How close he came to destroying me completely. How easily people believe the worst about those of us with diagnoses. How much harder we have to work to prove our own sanity. But I survived it. Documented it. Got him out of my life. That has to count for something. Has to mean I'm stronger than he thought I was. Stronger than I thought I was. Life is quieter now without someone actively trying to drive me insane. Turns out quiet is exactly what I needed. Story 5. My boyfriend reconnected with his toxic ex behind my back. I left him, and she disappeared. Now he's outside my apartment every night. Marcus showed me his phone at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. 300. Unread messages from his ex-girlfriend spread across 2 months. I scrolled through conversations where she called him baby, and he responded with heart emojis. Where she said she missed him, and he said he thought about her too. Where she complained about her new boyfriend, and Marcus told her she deserved better. All while I was sleeping next to him every night thinking we were solid. We'd been together 2 years when this happened. Marcus told me about his ex Sarah early on, said she was manipulative and controlling, that she'd isolated him from his friends and family during their 4-year relationship, that she cheated on him twice but convinced him both times it was somehow his fault, that when he finally left her, she showed up at his apartment for weeks, begging him to come back. He got a restraining order eventually, said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done but necessary. I believed every word, supported him through the anxiety he still carried from that relationship, never questioned why he'd jump when his phone buzzed or why he kept his notifications hidden. The truth came out by accident. We were watching TV and his phone died. He asked me to check a message on his iPad while he was in the shower. Thought it was his mom texting about dinner plans. Instead, I saw Sarah's name with a preview that said, "I can't stop thinking about last weekend." My stomach dropped. Opened the full conversation and found months of messages. They'd been talking since March. It was now August. 5 months of secret conversations where he complained about me to her, where he said I didn't understand him like she did, where he told her our sex life was boring, where she sent photos I won't describe, But that made it clear this wasn't just friendly catching up. I sat there reading through everything while the shower ran. Found out they'd met up 3 times, coffee twice, dinner once at a restaurant 40 minutes away where he knew we wouldn't run into anyone I knew. The messages after those meetups were especially bad. Him saying how good it felt to see her. Her saying they never should have broken up. Him not disagreeing, just saying the timing was complicated, that he needed to figure some things out. She asked if he was going to leave me, and he said he didn't know. Said he cared about me, but something was missing. That maybe he'd made a mistake ending things with her. Marcus got out of the shower and found me still reading. His face went white. Started explaining before I said anything. Claimed Sarah had reached out months ago asking to apologize for how their relationship ended. That he'd only responded to get closure. That the conversations spiraled but meant nothing. That he never actually did anything physical with her. I asked about the photos she'd sent. He said she sent those without him asking, and he told her to stop. Showed me a message from 2 weeks ago where he said, "Don't send stuff like that." But the message right after that was him calling her beautiful. No actual rejection, just weak deflection followed by encouragement. I asked why he met up with her if it was just about closure. He said she kept pushing, and he felt bad saying no, that she was going through a hard time with her new boyfriend, that she needed someone to talk to, and he felt obligated since they'd been together so long. I asked if he told her he had a girlfriend when they met up. Long pause. Then no. He said it didn't come up naturally, and he didn't want to be rude by bringing me into the conversation. As if not mentioning your girlfriend of 2 years to your ex wasn't the actual rude thing. As if hiding my existence was somehow more polite than acknowledging I existed. Went through more messages with him sitting there watching. Found texts where she asked if he was single and he said, basically. Found texts where she invited him to her apartment and he said maybe next time. Found texts where she said she wanted him back and he responded with, "We'll see what happens." Nothing definitive. Nothing that proved he'd physically cheated. But emotionally, completely checked out of our relationship and halfway back into his old one. All while I was planning a vacation for us and talking about maybe moving in together next year. I asked him what he wanted, if he wanted to be with her. He said no. Said he was confused and she'd gotten in his head, that their relationship was toxic and he knew that he just missed feeling wanted and Sarah made him feel that way. I asked if I didn't make him feel wanted. He said I did, but differently, that Sarah was more vocal about it, more demonstrative. I pointed out that Sarah was also manipulative and abusive according to everything he'd told me. He agreed, but said sometimes he wondered if he'd been too harsh about her, if maybe they'd just been young and immature, if maybe she'd changed. Told him he had one choice, delete her from everything and never contact her again, or I was done. He said he'd delete her, picked up his phone right there and blocked her number, unfollowed her on social media, deleted all their messages, seemed genuinely remorseful, crying and apologizing, saying he'd been stupid and throwing away the best thing in his life. I wanted to believe him, wanted to think this was a moment of weakness he'd moved past. But something felt off, the way he looked at his phone after blocking her. This sadness that seemed less about almost losing me and more about actually losing her. We tried for 2 weeks. I couldn't stop thinking about those messages. Couldn't stop picturing them at coffee shops or restaurants. Couldn't stop wondering what he said to her that he deleted before I could read. Couldn't trust that he'd actually stopped talking to her. Checked his phone constantly when he wasn't looking. Found nothing, but that didn't help. Just made me feel crazy and paranoid. He noticed. Asked what I needed from him to rebuild trust. I said I didn't know. Said maybe we needed couples therapy. He agreed. We scheduled an appointment. Never made it there. 3 days before our first session, his behavior changed. Started coming home from work late. Said he was picking up extra shifts. But I'd call his work looking for him, and they'd say he left on time. Started being secretive with his phone again. Taking it to the bathroom. Sleeping with it under his pillow. All the same patterns from before. I confronted him. He said I was being paranoid. That he'd done everything I asked, and I still didn't trust him. That he couldn't live like this with me constantly suspecting him. Turned it around on me like my reaction was the problem, instead of his choices. I left the next morning while he was at work, packed everything I had at his apartment, left my key on the counter with a note that said I was done. No explanation beyond that. Didn't owe him more than he'd given me. Moved my stuff back to my old roommate's place, the apartment I'd been planning to give up to move in with Marcus. Called my parents and told them we broke up. Didn't give details, just said it wasn't working. They were supportive. Said they'd sensed something was off lately, but didn't want to pry. Marcus called 40 times that day, left voicemails begging me to come back, saying he'd made mistakes but we could fix this, that he loved me and couldn't lose me. I didn't respond. Blocked his number after the 40th call. He started messaging me on social media. Same desperate pleas, same promises to do better. Blocked him there too. Finally got peace for about 6 hours. Then his best friend called. Said Marcus was a mess and I should at least talk to him. I told his friend what Marcus had done, the months of secret conversations, the meetups he'd hidden. His friend went quiet, then apologized and said he didn't know. Said Marcus told him we broke up because I was too jealous and controlling, that I didn't trust him and made his life miserable. His friend said he'd talk to Marcus. I told him not to bother, to just tell Marcus to leave me alone. 2 days later, I found out why Marcus had been so desperate. Sarah dumped him. According to a mutual acquaintance who still followed both of us on social media, Sarah had been seeing Marcus again after I left. They'd reconnected immediately. Marcus told people we were done, and he was back with his ex. Except Sarah's boyfriend found out, confronted her. She chose her boyfriend over Marcus, blocked Marcus on everything, refused to see him. Marcus spiraled, started posting cryptic, depressing stuff online. His friends got worried. One reached out to me asking if I knew what was going on. I told them everything. They were shocked, said they had no idea Marcus had been that person, that he'd always painted Sarah as the villain and himself as the victim. Marcus started calling from different numbers I didn't recognize, so I'd answer. He'd immediately launch into apologies and explanations, how Sarah had manipulated him, again, how he'd made a huge mistake, how I was the only person who truly mattered, that he'd do anything to fix this. Go to therapy, cut off everyone, move to a different city, whatever I needed. I told him nothing he offered would change what he'd done, that he'd made his choice when he started hiding conversations with his ex, that he made it again when he went back to her the second I left, that I was done and he needed to accept that. He showed up at my work a week later, just standing in the parking lot by my car. I saw him before he saw me and went back inside, asked my manager to walk me out. She did. Marcus tried to approach and my manager stepped between us, told him to leave or she'd call the police. He left, but not before shouting that I was making a mistake, that we belonged together, that I'd regret this. My manager asked if I wanted to file a report. I said not yet, hoped he'd get the message and stop. He didn't stop. Started showing up at my apartment building, not knocking on my door, just sitting in his car outside. For hours. My roommate noticed first, said there was some guy in a blue sedan who'd been parked across the street every night that week. I looked out the window and recognized Marcus's car, called him and told him to leave. He said he just wanted to make sure I was safe, that he wasn't bothering me, just watching over me. I told him that was exactly bothering me, that sitting outside my apartment was stalking. He said he'd leave, but didn't. Stayed another 2 hours before driving away. This became his pattern. Every night around 7 he'd park outside my building, stay until midnight or later. Sometimes he'd send messages from new numbers, not threatening, just sad, talking about memories we had together, places we went, things I'd said that made him laugh, like if he reminded me of good times I'd forget the bad ones. I stopped responding entirely, blocked every new number, but he kept finding ways to contact me, email, LinkedIn, even Venmo with messages in the notes section, each one more desperate than the last. My roommate wanted to call the police. I said not yet, wanted to give Marcus one more chance to stop on his own, sent him an email laying everything out, that his behavior was unacceptable, that showing up where I lived was harassment, that I would get a restraining order if he didn't stop immediately. He responded within 5 minutes, long rambling email about how he wasn't trying to scare me, how he just needed me to understand that Sarah meant nothing, that his feelings for her were just confusion and nostalgia, that what we had was real and worth fighting for, that he wouldn't give up on us even if I had. Got the restraining order the next day. Took my documentation to the courthouse, all his messages, photos of his car outside my building with timestamps, testimony from my roommate and my manager. The judge granted a temporary order. Marcus got served at work. According to his friend, who still occasionally contacted me, Marcus had a breakdown when he got the papers. Didn't understand why I was doing this to him. Thought I was overreacting. Said he wasn't dangerous, just trying to show me he cared. His friend told him that wasn't how any of this worked, that his behavior was exactly why restraining orders exist. The order meant Marcus couldn't come within 500 feet of me, couldn't contact me through any means, couldn't show up at my work or my apartment. For 3 days, I had peace. Actually slept through the night. Didn't check over my shoulder constantly. Started to feel like maybe this was finally over. Then my roommate texted me a photo. Marcus's car parked 2 streets over. Not directly outside our building, but close enough that he could see who came and went. Technically not violating the order since he was more than 500 feet away, but obviously still watching. Called the police. They sent an officer to talk to him. Marcus claimed he was visiting a friend who lived on that street. Happened to park there. Pure coincidence. The officer couldn't do anything since he wasn't technically violating the restraining order. But she documented everything, took photos, got his statement on record, told him she'd be monitoring the situation, suggested maybe his friend lived somewhere else he could visit. Marcus left. Showed up again the next night 2 streets over in a different direction. This went on for weeks. Marcus playing games with the distance requirement, always just far enough away that he wasn't violating the order, but close enough that I knew he was there. My roommate installed a security camera pointed at the street. We documented every time his car appeared. Different streets, different times, but always within a few blocks. Always where he could watch. I stopped leaving my apartment except for work. Started having groceries delivered. Avoided going out at night entirely. My life had become smaller because of his obsession. My parents wanted me to move back home. Said this situation was too dangerous. That Marcus was clearly unstable. I refused. Said I wouldn't let him control my life more than he already had. But the stress was affecting everything. My work performance dropped. Couldn't focus. Constantly anxious. Started having panic attacks when I saw blue sedans. My roommate was worried, said maybe my parents were right, that my safety mattered more than proving a point. The situation escalated 3 months after the breakup. I came home from work to find flowers on my doorstep. No note. But I knew they were from Marcus. He'd left them just outside the 500-foot boundary, and someone had brought them to my door. My roommate threw them away immediately. But more appeared the next day. And the day after that. Always delivered to the boundary, always making their way to my door through kind neighbors who didn't know better. Got the restraining order extended. The judge wasn't happy about Marcus's boundary games. Said he was clearly violating the spirit of the order even if he wasn't technically violating the letter. Extended it for another year. Added explicit language about proxy contact. That included gifts left at the boundary. Marcus got served again. His friend said he lost it. Started ranting about how unfair this was, how he was just trying to show me he still cared, how I was punishing him for loving me too much. His behavior changed after the extension, got more erratic, started showing up at places I went regularly, coffee shop I liked, grocery store near my apartment, library where I worked, always maintaining the required distance, always claiming coincidence. But the pattern was obvious. He was tracking my movements somehow. I checked my car for GPS devices, found nothing, changed all my passwords, checked my phone for spyware, clean, couldn't figure out how he always knew where I'd be. Then my roommate figured it out. One of our mutual friends was still in contact with Marcus, feeling sorry for him, thinking I was being too harsh. They'd been casually mentioning where I was going when Marcus asked, not thinking anything of it because they weren't directly telling him to show up, just making conversation. My roommate confronted them. They admitted it. Said they thought Marcus just wanted to accidentally run into me. That maybe if we talked, things would get better. My roommate told them they were enabling a stalker, that they needed to cut Marcus off immediately or we'd include them in the next restraining order. The friend stopped talking to Marcus. His coincidental appearances stopped. Life got quieter again. But I knew it wasn't over. Marcus was too invested in this narrative he'd created, where he was the devoted boyfriend fighting for true love, where I was the girl who just needed to see how much he cared. Nothing I said or did changed his mind. Every boundary I set just made him try harder. Every consequence just made him feel more victimized. My therapist said this was common with people like Marcus, that they built entire identities around relationships. That when those relationships ended, they couldn't accept it because it meant accepting their own role in the failure. That Marcus needed professional help, but I couldn't be the one to give it to him. That my only responsibility was protecting myself. She was right, but it didn't make dealing with it easier. 6 months after the breakup, Marcus finally stopped appearing regularly. His car would show up occasionally, but not every night. The messages decreased. Weeks would go by without contact attempts. I started to relax, started going out more, stopped checking over my shoulder constantly. My roommate said she thought maybe he'd finally moved on. I hoped she was right, but didn't quite believe it. Then I heard through mutual friends that Marcus was dating someone new, a girl who worked at his office. They'd been seeing each other for a month. He seemed happy, more stable. His friends were relieved, thought this new relationship was what he needed to finally let go of me. I felt relief mixed with concern for this new girl. Wondered if he'd told her about me, about the restraining order, about his behavior. Doubted it. Hoped she'd be more careful than I'd been. That she'd see warning signs earlier. The restraining order expired a year after it was extended. I could have renewed it, but chose not to. Marcus hadn't appeared in months. Seemed like he'd finally moved forward. Renewing felt like holding on to something I was ready to release. My therapist supported the decision, said I seemed stronger, more confident, that I'd done the work to heal and rebuild. Life got back to normal slowly. Started dating again. Nothing serious. Just casual meetups that reminded me what healthy looked like. Friends who hadn't seen me much during the worst of it commented on how different I seemed. Lighter, happier, more like myself. My roommate said she was proud of how I'd handled everything, that I'd protected myself while staying strong. I still think about those 2 years sometimes. The relationship I thought was solid that was actually built on lies. The person I trusted who hid entire parts of his life. The aftermath that lasted longer than the relationship. But mostly I think about what I learned. That trust has to be earned. That red flags exist for reasons. That leaving is always an option even when someone makes you feel like it isn't. That healing takes time, but happens if you let it. Marcus taught me what I won't accept, what I won't tolerate, what I deserve instead. The experience left marks, but also made me certain about my boundaries. Made me confident in my ability to protect myself. Made me grateful for the people who stood by me through it all. Life is quieter now. Smaller in some ways, but fuller, more honest. Mine again. That's what matters. Story 6. My stepdad beat me unconscious, and my mom watched. She refused to press charges. Then he came back and did it again. The beer bottle shattered against my skull before I saw it coming. Glass rained down my neck and I tasted copper. Blood or beer, couldn't tell which. My stepdad Rick was already charging when I hit the floor. Mom screamed from the kitchen doorway but didn't move. Just stood there with her hands over her mouth while he kicked my ribs. This was the second time in 4 months. The first time, she'd begged me not to press charges. Said he was sick. Said the psych ward would fix him. Said I was destroying the family. I'd walked into our apartment 3 hours earlier, home from my shift at the campus bookstore. Finals were in 2 weeks, and I'd been planning to study. Instead, I found Rick drunk in the living room. Not unusual. He'd been drinking more since getting released from the psychiatric facility. Mom kept making excuses, said he was adjusting, said the transition was hard, said we needed to be patient. I'd been avoiding him for weeks, staying at the library until it closed. Coming home only to sleep. But tonight I'd forgotten my charger and needed my laptop for a paper due tomorrow. Walked in and immediately knew I should leave. Rick was slouched on the couch, empty whiskey bottle on the coffee table, another one half finished in his hand. He looked up when I entered and his eyes were wrong, that glassy, unfocused stare he got before things escalated. I tried to go straight to my room. Didn't make eye contact, didn't say anything, but he called my name, told me to come here. I kept walking. He stood up fast enough that the couch scraped against the floor, asked where I thought I was going, said I was being disrespectful. I told him I had homework and kept moving toward my room. He grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. His breath smelled like straight liquor. He asked if I thought I was better than him. Better than him because I was in college while he worked construction. I said no and tried to pull away. He shoved me backward into the wall. Pictures rattled in their frames. Mom came out of the kitchen asking what was going on. Rick told her to stay out of it, that he was teaching his stepson some respect. She looked at me with this pleading expression like I could de-escalate if I just tried harder, like his behavior was somehow my responsibility. I told him I didn't want any trouble, just needed to grab something from my room, then I'd leave. He laughed, said I wasn't going anywhere until we settled this. Settled what? I didn't know. There was nothing to settle, just Rick drunk and looking for a target like always. He poked my chest with his finger, hard enough to hurt, asked why I was avoiding him, why I came home late every night, if I was ashamed of him. I said no because any other answer would make it worse. But no wasn't good enough. Never was. He grabbed my shirt collar and pulled me close, told me I was ungrateful, that he'd let me live here rent-free while I went to school, and this was how I repaid him, by acting like he didn't exist, by treating him like garbage in his own home. I pointed out this was Mom's apartment, that she'd been living here before they got married, that technically he was the one who'd moved into our space. Wrong thing to say. His face changed, that shift from drunk and angry to something worse, something calculated and mean. He let go of my collar and took a step back. For a second I thought maybe he'd calm down, walk away, sleep it off. Then he picked up the beer bottle and everything went black. Came to with Mom crying over me, face wet with tears and snot. She was saying my name over and over, asking if I could hear her. I tried to sit up, but the room spun. Pain radiated from the back of my head down my spine. I touched my scalp and my hand came back bloody, glass embedded in my hair. Mom was already calling 911. Rick was gone. Not in the living room, not anywhere I could see. She told me he'd left right after, that he'd panicked when I didn't get up, that he was sorry and didn't mean it. That same script she'd been reading from for years. I asked why she didn't stop him, why she just stood there. She said it happened so fast. Said she froze. Said she didn't know what to do. The paramedics arrived and loaded me into an ambulance. Mom rode with me holding my hand. At the hospital they cleaned the glass out of my head. 12 stitches. Possible concussion. Bruised ribs from where he'd kicked me while I was down. The doctor asked what happened, and I told the truth. Said my stepdad hit me with a bottle. The doctor's expression hardened. Asked if this was the first time. I said no. Said he'd put me and my mom in the hospital 4 months ago. That he'd been in a psych ward. That he'd been released 3 weeks ago, and things had been okay until tonight. The doctor left and came back with a police officer. The officer took my statement, took photos of my injuries, asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes immediately. Mom started crying harder, begging me not to do this, saying Rick needed help, not jail, that he was sick and didn't know what he was doing. The officer looked at her and asked if she was refusing to press charges for her own injuries. Mom nodded, said she just wanted him to get help. The officer explained that I could press charges independently as the victim, that Mom's refusal wouldn't stop prosecution. Mom looked at me with these desperate eyes, asked me to reconsider, said this would destroy Rick, destroy our family. I told her Rick had already done that when he cracked my skull open. Rick got arrested at his brother's house 2 hours later, charged with aggravated assault, domestic violence, violation of his release conditions from the psych ward. He called Mom from jail begging her to bail him out. She wanted to. I could see it on her face, that pull toward him despite everything. But she didn't have the money. His bail was set at $50,000. She had maybe $300 in her checking account. She called his family asking for help. They refused, said they were done enabling him, that he needed to face consequences this time. Mom cried for days, visited him in jail every week, brought him money for commissary, wrote him letters, acted like he was the victim in all this. The court date came 4 months later. Rick's lawyer tried to argue mental illness, tried to say he wasn't responsible for his actions, pulled out his psych ward records, his medication history, testimonies from doctors who'd treated him, made him sound like a sick man who needed help, not punishment. The prosecutor pulled out something else: Rick's criminal record from before he met Mom, 3 prior domestic violence arrests, 2 restraining orders from ex-girlfriends, 1 conviction that got pleaded down to anger management classes he never completed, pattern of violence spanning a decade. This wasn't mental illness. This was who Rick was. Mom testified for the defense, cried on the stand talking about how much Rick had changed, how the psych ward had helped, how he was trying so hard. She begged the judge to be lenient, to give him another chance, to send him back to treatment instead of prison. The prosecutor asked her about her injuries from the first incident, the bruises documented in hospital photos, the broken ribs, asked if that was what trying hard looked like. Mom said Rick apologized, that he felt terrible, that it was an isolated incident caused by stopping his medication too quickly. The prosecutor asked about my injuries, about the 12 stitches, about the glass they'd removed from my scalp, about the concussion, asked if that was also an isolated incident. Mom didn't answer, just cried harder. I testified too, told the court everything. The years of watching him hurt Mom, the times he'd shoved me or grabbed me or threatened me, the escalation over time, the first serious attack that landed us both in the hospital, Mom's refusal to press charges, the psych ward that obviously hadn't fixed anything. Then this attack, unprovoked, violent, could have killed me if the bottle had hit differently. The judge listened, looked at Rick's record, looked at the hospital photos, looked at my mom crying in the gallery, then sentenced Rick to 5 years in prison. No early release, no probation, hard time. Mom screamed, actually screamed in the courtroom. Security had to escort her out while she sobbed. Rick looked at me from the defendant's table. His expression was pure hatred, mouthed something I couldn't quite make out but understood perfectly. This wasn't over. He'd remember this. When he got out, he'd make me pay. The bailiff removed him while Mom wailed in the hallway. I felt nothing, just relief. 5 years of not looking over my shoulder. 5 years of Mom being safe whether she appreciated it or not. 5 years to figure out my life without him in it. Outside the courthouse, Mom was waiting. I thought maybe to thank me, to acknowledge that Rick being locked up meant she was safe. Instead, she attacked, not physically, verbally, screamed that I'd destroyed her life, that I'd taken away the man she loved, that I was selfish and cruel and had torn apart our family, that she'd given me everything, and this was how I repaid her, by putting her husband in prison. I tried to explain that he'd put himself there, that his actions had consequences, that I'd almost died. She said I was exaggerating, that the doctor said it was a concussion, not a skull fracture, that Rick hadn't meant to hurt me that badly, that I'd provoked him by being disrespectful. I asked how I'd provoked him, what I'd done that justified getting hit with a bottle. She said I knew how to push his buttons, that I'd been avoiding him for weeks, that he felt unwelcome in his own home, that my coldness had hurt him and he'd lashed out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was blaming me for my own assault, blaming me for his violence, making excuses for the inexcusable. I told her she was insane if she thought any of that justified what he'd done. She slapped me, right there on the courthouse steps, told me never to speak to her like that again, that I was ungrateful and disrespectful and she was done with me, that I should pack my things and get out of her apartment, that she never wanted to see me again. I left, stayed with a friend from school. His parents had an extra room and said I could crash there until I figured things out. They didn't ask for rent, just said to help with groceries when I could. They were kind in a way I'd forgotten families could be. Quiet, peaceful, no walking on eggshells, no monitoring someone's mood, no bracing for violence, just normal dinner conversations and movie nights and people treating each other with basic respect. It felt foreign. I didn't know how to exist in that space at first, kept waiting for something to go wrong, for someone to explode. But nothing did. I blocked Mom's number, couldn't handle the texts she'd send, alternating between rage and guilt trips, saying I'd abandoned her, that I was just like my real dad who'd left when I was 3, that I was selfish and didn't care about anyone but myself. then switching to saying she missed me, that Rick was in prison because of me, and now she was alone, that I owed her after everything she'd sacrificed. The whiplash was exhausting. My friend's parents suggested therapy. Their insurance covered students living with them temporarily. I started going twice a week. The therapist helped me understand what I'd been living through, explained terms like enabling and codependency, helped me see that Mom's choices weren't my responsibility, that I couldn't save someone who didn't want saving, that protecting myself wasn't selfish, that I'd done the right thing pressing charges even though it cost me my relationship with Mom. The sessions were brutal, breaking down years of conditioning, realizing how abnormal my normal had been, understanding that the guilt I carried wasn't mine to bear. Mom had made her choices. Rick had made his. I'd just refused to keep being their victim. Finished my degree 3 years later, got a job across the state, moved into my own apartment, built a life that felt stable, joined a support group for people who'd left abusive families, met others with similar stories, mothers who chose abusive partners over their children, families that fractured along fault lines of violence and denial, people trying to build new lives from the rubble. We shared strategies for managing guilt, for dealing with the grief of losing family, for recognizing that some bridges needed to burn. Rick got released after 4 years. Good behavior, apparently. Mom was waiting for him when he walked out. She'd written him every week in prison, visited monthly, sent money, told him she'd never stopped believing in him. They got back together immediately. I knew because she sent me a Facebook friend request from an account I didn't know she had. Accepted it out of morbid curiosity. Her profile was public. Photos of her and Rick at restaurants, on vacation, at family gatherings with his relatives, smiling like nothing had happened, like he hadn't almost killed me, like 4 years in prison had erased a decade of violence. She messaged me through Facebook, said she wanted to talk, that enough time had passed, that Rick had changed in prison, really changed this time, that he'd done anger management classes and therapy, that he wanted to apologize to me, that we could be a family again if I just gave him another chance. I didn't respond. Blocked that account too. Told my support group what happened. They warned me this was common, that abusers and their enablers often try to reconnect after time passes, that Mom was probably lonely, that Rick probably wanted to show he'd reformed, that neither of them had actually changed. 6 months after Rick's release, I got a call from an unknown number, ignored it. They left a voicemail. It was Mom, crying, saying she was in the hospital, that Rick had hurt her, that it was bad this time, that she needed me, gave me the hospital name and room number, then hung up. I sat staring at my phone for an hour. Part of me wanted to rush to the hospital, to make sure she was okay, to be there for her like I'd always been. The other part knew this was the pattern. Violence, hospital, apologies, reconciliation, repeat. Nothing would change unless she wanted it to, and she'd made it clear years ago that she didn't. I didn't go to the hospital, didn't call back, didn't reach out, just blocked that number too and tried to move on. My therapist said that was healthy, that I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who refused to protect themselves, that Mom knew what Rick was, knew what he was capable of, chose him anyway. Those were her choices, and I couldn't save her from consequences she kept choosing. The guilt was crushing anyway. The feeling that I should do something, that she was my mom regardless of everything, that family meant not giving up. But I'd given up everything already. My safety, my peace, years of my life. There was nothing left to give. Found out later through Rick's brother's Facebook that Mom had pressed charges that time, that Rick was back in prison. Longer sentence. The prosecutor mentioned his prior conviction, the violated parole, the pattern. Mom filed for divorce while he was awaiting trial. Finally, after everything, after 20 years of his violence, after almost losing me, after he'd put her in the hospital again, she filed. Rick's brother said she'd moved to a different city, changed her number, started therapy, was trying to rebuild. I felt nothing hearing that. Not relief, not vindication, just emptiness. She'd saved herself too late, after sacrificing me, after choosing him repeatedly until there was no other choice. I was glad she was safe, but couldn't forget the cost. She tried to reach me through Rick's brother, asked him to give me her new number, said she wanted to apologize, to explain, to rebuild our relationship. He asked if I wanted it. I said no. Said to tell her I was glad she was safe, but I couldn't have her in my life. That the damage was done. That I'd moved on. He understood. Said he'd tell her. Said he was sorry for everything his brother had done. That he wished he'd intervened sooner. I told him it wasn't his responsibility either. That Rick's choices were his own. That we'd all done what we could. Life is quieter now. Smaller in some ways. No parents, no family. Just chosen family. Friends who showed up when biology didn't. Support group members who understood. A therapist who helped me rebuild. A partner eventually who came from a healthy family and showed me what normal looked like. We don't have drama. Don't have violence. Don't have cycles. Just peace. Boring, beautiful peace. Sometimes I think about Mom. Wonder if she's okay. If she's really healing or just waiting until Rick gets out again. If she thinks about me. If she regrets choosing him over me repeatedly until I had nothing left to give. Mostly I think about what I learned. That you can't save people who don't want saving. That love isn't enough when someone refuses to protect themselves. That walking away isn't abandonment when staying means destroying yourself. That family is what you build, not what you're born into. Mom taught me that. Not intentionally. But through every choice she made to enable Rick, to excuse him, to choose him over me. She taught me that some people will never save themselves no matter how much you sacrifice, and you have to let them go before they drown you too. That's the lesson I carry, the scar I wear, the price I paid for surviving. Life is smaller now, but it's mine. Safe, stable, free from violence. That has to be enough. Story 7. I dressed as a home invader to surprise my roommate, but broke into the wrong unit and got arrested for attempted murder. The hunting knife was 6 inches from my face when I realized this wasn't my roommate's apartment. The man holding it was screaming at his girlfriend to call 911 while backing me toward the door. I was wearing a ski mask, all black clothes, and carrying a realistic prop gun I'd bought for $70 at a costume shop. My hands were covered in fake blood. I'd kicked their door open singing some stupid song from TikTok. This was supposed to be funny. My roommate Jake had been depressed for weeks after losing his job. We'd been living together for 2 years, and I'd watched him spiral. Stopped showering regularly, ordered takeout for every meal, spent entire days in his room playing video games. I wanted to shake him out of it. Do something memorable that would make him laugh and remember life wasn't completely terrible. The idea came from a prank video I'd seen where someone dressed as a burglar and their friend's reaction was hilarious. Everyone laughed. It went viral, seemed harmless. I didn't think about what could go wrong. I went to Spirit Halloween on a Tuesday afternoon, bought the ski mask, fake gun, plastic knife, and theatrical blood. The cashier asked what the costume was for. I told her a prank. She laughed and wished me luck. Spent 40 minutes in my car in the parking lot watching YouTube tutorials on how to apply fake blood realistically. Made it look like I'd been in a fight, like I was dangerous. The effect was convincing. Too convincing. Should have realized that then. Jake texted me around 6 p.m. saying he'd be home late. Meeting up with his brother for dinner. Perfect timing. Gave me a window to set everything up. I drove to our apartment building with my costume in a duffel bag. Waited in my car until I saw his brother's car pull into the visitor parking. Watched them walk toward the building entrance together. Jake looked tired even from a distance. This was going to cheer him up. I was sure of it. I gave them 15 minutes to get upstairs and settled. Changed into my costume in the building's stairwell. Pulled the ski mask down. Smeared the fake blood on my hands and shirt. Checked my reflection in my phone camera. Looked legitimately terrifying. Exactly what I wanted. Took the stairs up to the 3rd floor where our apartment was. Unit 3B. I'd lived there for 2 years. Knew the layout perfectly. The plan was simple. Kick the door open. Run in screaming. Watch Jake freak out. Then pull off the mask and laugh. Except when I got to the 3rd floor hallway, I got disoriented. The building had 2 wings. East and west. Our apartment was in the east wing. But I came up the west stairwell by mistake. The hallway looked identical. Same beige walls. Same numbered doors, same fluorescent lighting that buzzed. I walked down counting doors, found what I thought was 3B. The door was slightly ajar, unlocked. Jake must have just gotten inside and forgotten to close it properly. Perfect. Element of surprise. I kicked the door hard, it slammed open, and I charged inside singing that stupid song. Hello, my baby. Hello, my darling. Hello, my ragtime gal. Waving the fake gun around, fake blood dripping down my arms. Expected to see Jake and his brother on the couch. Expected shock, then laughter. Instead, I saw a woman I'd never seen before. She was standing in the kitchen holding a wine glass. Mid-30s, blonde hair, absolutely terrified expression. She dropped the glass. It shattered on the tile floor, started screaming. A man came running out of the bedroom. Also someone I'd never seen. Tall, built like he worked construction. He took one look at me, and his face went from confused to rage. Ran to the kitchen, grabbed a hunting knife from the block on the counter, started moving toward me, yelling at the woman to call the cops, asking what I wanted, telling me to get the fuck out of his apartment. I froze, brain trying to process that this was very wrong, that I was in the wrong apartment, that these people thought I was actually trying to hurt them. The man kept advancing with the knife. I stumbled backward, ripped off my ski mask trying to show I wasn't a threat. Started saying it was a mistake, that I was just trying to prank my roommate, that this was the wrong apartment. He wasn't listening, just kept yelling. The woman was on her phone now. I could hear her screaming at the 911 operator that someone had broken into their apartment, that her boyfriend had a knife, that the intruder had a gun. I looked down at the prop gun still in my hand and realized how bad this looked, how absolutely catastrophically bad. I turned and ran, back into the hallway, could hear the man chasing me. I sprinted toward the elevator, pressed the button frantically. It was on the 6th floor, not moving fast enough. The man was at his doorway now, still holding the knife, still yelling. Other apartment doors were opening, people looking out to see what the commotion was. I gave up on the elevator and ran for the stairs, took them 2 at a time going down. Heard the man stop chasing after the 2nd floor, his voice echoing that he was calling the cops too. Got to the ground floor, stopped in the stairwell to strip off the costume, hands shaking so badly I could barely work the buttons. Shoved everything into my duffel bag, the ski mask, the fake gun, the bloody shirt. Put on the plain t-shirt I'd worn under the costume. Tried to wipe the fake blood off my hands, but it had dried sticky. Didn't come off clean, smeared more than removed. I needed to get to my car, needed to get out of here before the cops arrived, needed to somehow fix this disaster. Stepped out of the stairwell into the lobby. 3 police cars were already outside, lights flashing, officers getting out, walking toward the building entrance. I panicked, tried to walk calmly toward the side exit. Maybe they wouldn't notice me. Maybe I could slip away. Then one of them spotted me, saw the duffel bag, saw the blood still on my hands and arms, pointed, yelled for me to stop. My heart fell through the floor. All 3 officers converged on me immediately, hands on their weapons, telling me to drop the bag, to put my hands up, to get on the ground. I dropped the bag and raised my hands, tried to explain that this was a misunderstanding, that I wasn't dangerous, that everything in the bag was fake. One officer approached the bag carefully, unzipped it with his foot, saw the contents, and his expression darkened. The mask, the prop gun that looked real enough to fool anyone, the knife, the bloody clothes. He looked at me and said I was under arrest. They cuffed me right there in the lobby, read me my rights while curious neighbors watched from windows and doorways, loaded me into the back of a squad car. The ride to the police station was silent except for radio chatter. I sat there with my head against the window trying to figure out how to explain this, how to make them understand I wasn't a criminal, just an idiot who made a catastrophically bad decision. The station was busy, officers everywhere processing paperwork and dealing with other cases. They took me to a small interrogation room, metal table, 2 chairs, camera in the corner recording everything. A detective came in, older guy, gray hair, looked tired and annoyed. He asked for my name, address, date of birth. I answered everything. Then he asked what I was doing breaking into an apartment dressed like a home invader. I told him the whole story, about Jake being depressed, about wanting to cheer him up, about the prank videos I'd seen online, about getting the wrong apartment by mistake. He listened without interrupting. His expression didn't change. When I finished, he asked if I was really that stupid, if I seriously thought any of this was a good idea. I said no, that I realized now how badly I'd messed up, that I never meant to scare those people. The detective left me alone for an hour, came back with printouts, security footage stills from the building, showed me walking into the wrong apartment in full costume, showed me running out and changing in the stairwell, showed me trying to leave through the side exit. He said the couple in the apartment had given statements, that the woman was traumatized, that the man thought he was going to have to stab me to protect her, that they wanted me prosecuted to the fullest extent. I asked what that meant. He said breaking and entering, assault, possibly attempted robbery, that I was looking at serious time. They processed me that night, took my fingerprints, my mugshot, issued me jail clothes, put me in a holding cell with 3 other guys. One was sleeping, one was pacing, one just stared at the wall. I sat on the metal bench and tried to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. This had to be some nightmare. Except it was real. Painfully real. I'd destroyed my life trying to pull a prank. My public defender showed up 2 days later. Young woman, maybe 5 years older than me, overworked and underpaid based on the bags under her eyes. She sat across from me in a consultation room and reviewed my case file, asked me to tell her everything. I repeated the same story I'd told the detective. She took notes, but didn't look optimistic. Said the problem was the severity of what I'd done. That even though my intentions weren't malicious, my actions had terrorized innocent people. That judges and juries don't care about intentions when the consequences are this serious. She said my best bet was pleading guilty to reduce charges, maybe get it down to misdemeanor breaking and entering, maybe avoid prison time. But the prosecutor wasn't in a deal-making mood. The couple's victim impact statements were brutal. They'd installed new locks, bought a security system. The woman was seeing a therapist twice a week for PTSD. The man kept a baseball bat by the bed now. They couldn't sleep without checking every room first. Their sense of safety had been completely destroyed. Because of me. My arraignment was a blur. Standing in front of a judge, pleading not guilty on my lawyer's advice. Bail set at $50,000. My parents scraped together the 10% for a bondsman, got me out after a week in county jail. That week was enough to show me what I was facing if this went to trial, and I lost. The violence, the noise, the absolute lack of privacy or dignity. I couldn't survive years of that. My lawyer kept trying to negotiate. The prosecutor kept refusing, said they were making an example, that too many people thought pranks were harmless, that consequences needed to be clear and severe. They were offering a deal now. Plead guilty to felony breaking and entering. 2 years in prison. Take it or risk 10 years if convicted at trial. I had a week to decide. Jake visited me during that week. First time I'd seen him since before the prank. He looked guilty, said he felt responsible. That if he hadn't been depressed, I wouldn't have tried to cheer him up. I told him that was stupid. That this was entirely on me. That I'd made the worst possible choices. He said he'd testify as a character witness if we went to trial. That he'd explain my intentions. My lawyer said it wouldn't help. That character witnesses don't matter when the crime is this serious. That I needed to take the deal. I took the deal. Stood in court and pleaded guilty. The judge asked if I understood what I was admitting to. If I understood the consequences. I said yes, even though I didn't really. Not fully. Not until sentencing 2 weeks later when that same judge gave me 18 months. Said I was lucky. That I could have gotten much worse. That maybe prison would teach me to think before acting. That society needed protection from people who terrorized others even accidentally. The bailiff led me away in handcuffs. My parents were crying in the gallery. Jake looked destroyed. My lawyer looked unsurprised. Prison was exactly as bad as that week in county jail suggested. Worse, actually. The noise was constant, screaming, metal clanging, guards yelling, no moment of quiet, no moment of peace. My cellmate was serving 5 years for armed robbery. He laughed when I told him why I was there, said I was the dumbest motherfucker he'd ever met, that only an idiot gets prison time for a prank gone wrong. Other inmates agreed. The story spread. I became a joke. The prank guy. The moron who terrorized strangers trying to make his friend laugh. The routine was soul-crushing. Wake at 6, count, breakfast, work detail in the kitchen, lunch, yard time if behavior was good, dinner, count again, lights out at 10, same thing every day, weekends barely different, just no work detail, nothing to break up the monotony except violence. Fights broke out constantly, over nothing, over everything. Someone looking at someone wrong, someone taking someone's seat, someone saying something that sounded like disrespect. I kept my head down, stayed quiet, avoided everyone. Counted days. The couple from the apartment showed up 6 months into my sentence. Victim reconciliation program. Voluntary for them. Mandatory for me as part of my sentence. We sat in a mediation room with a counselor. The woman looked older than I remembered. Tired. The man looked angry still. The counselor explained the process. They'd speak. I'd listen. Then I could respond if they wanted. The woman went first. Described what that night had been like. How terrified she'd been. How certain she was going to die. How she couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. How she'd developed panic attacks. How her relationship had suffered because she didn't feel safe anymore. She cried through most of it. The man spoke next. Said he'd been prepared to kill me. That he would have if I hadn't run. That he'd had nightmares about it. About stabbing someone. About becoming a killer. That for weeks afterward he'd been on edge. Aggressive. Paranoid. That he'd almost lost his job because he couldn't focus. That their landlord had to install security measures before they'd stay. That they'd considered moving but couldn't afford it. That every day walking into that apartment reminded them of what I'd done. When they finished, the counselor asked if I wanted to respond. I apologized. Said I knew sorry wasn't enough. That I understood the damage I'd caused. That I'd give anything to undo it. The woman said she didn't forgive me. That she probably never would. The man just stared. They left without looking back. Released after 14 months. Good behavior credit. Stepped out of prison into a world that felt foreign. Too bright. Too loud. Too fast. My parents picked me up. Drove me to their house. My apartment with Jake was gone. He'd moved out months ago. Couldn't afford it alone. My stuff was in storage. My job was obviously gone. My record made finding new work nearly impossible. Felony conviction. Shows up on every background check. Employers see it and make assumptions. That I'm violent, dangerous, untrustworthy. Doesn't matter that it was a mistake, a prank. Doesn't matter that I never intended harm. Only matters what I did. Applied to 70 jobs in 3 months. Got 2 interviews. Both ended when they asked about my conviction. When I explained, they looked skeptical. Said they'd be in touch. Never called back. Finally found work through a temp agency. Warehouse job, loading trucks, $10 an hour, 40 hours a week. Enough to afford a studio apartment in a bad part of town. Barely. Started going to therapy. Court mandated initially. Continued on my own after. Trying to process everything. Trying to understand how one stupid decision cascaded into destroying my entire life. The therapist helped me see the pattern. That I didn't think about consequences. That I acted impulsively. That I prioritized short-term amusement over long-term impact. That I needed to rebuild my entire decision-making process. Sounds dramatic, but it's accurate. I learned to pause, to consider, to ask what could go wrong before acting. Basic stuff most people learn as children. I'd somehow missed it. Cost me everything. Jake and I reconnected eventually, year after my release. He reached out through Facebook, said he felt guilty still, that he'd been in therapy too, processing what happened. We met for coffee. Conversation was awkward. We weren't friends anymore. Too much had happened. But we talked. He was doing better, had a new job, new apartment, new girlfriend. His life had moved forward. Mine had imploded. We wished each other well. Haven't spoken since. The couple from the apartment moved away. Found out through my parole officer. They'd relocated across the country. Needed distance from what happened. Needed to feel safe again. I don't blame them. I destroyed their sense of security in their own home. That violation doesn't heal easily. Probably never heals completely. They'll carry what I did to them forever. That knowledge is its own prison. 3 years out now. Still working warehouse jobs. Still living in my studio apartment. Still dealing with the weight of my conviction. Dating is impossible. How do you explain a felony record on a first date? Hi, I'm the guy who accidentally terrorized strangers and went to prison. Most people don't want that story. The few who do usually have their own messy histories. We bond over being damaged, over having destroyed our own lives through monumentally stupid choices. It's not healthy, but it's all I can manage. Sometimes I think about parallel universes, about the version of me that counted doors correctly, that burst into my actual apartment, that scared Jake and his brother, and then everyone laughed. That version of me didn't lose everything, didn't go to prison, didn't traumatize innocent people. That version's life continued normally. This version's life ended that night. What came after was just survival, just carrying the consequences, just living with knowing I destroyed multiple lives, including my own, over a prank, over wanting to make someone laugh. The lesson everyone wants to hear is that I learned and grew, that this made me better somehow, stronger, wiser. Maybe that's true. I'm certainly more careful now, more aware of consequences, more conscious of how my actions affect others. But I'm also broken in ways that don't fix, paranoid about making mistakes, paralyzed by decisions, convinced everything I touch will turn to disaster. That's not growth, that's just damage. That's what happens when you destroy your own life and have to keep living in the rubble. Life is smaller now, quieter, safer maybe, but also emptier, lonelier, defined entirely by one catastrophically stupid mistake that will follow me forever. That's the real consequence, not the prison time, the permanent mark, the permanent diminishment, the permanent knowledge that I did this to myself, and there's no way back. Story 8. I skipped my thesis defense to drop acid at a rave, and my advisor refused to reschedule, so I faked a medical emergency to get another shot. The paramedics were asking my name when I realized my thesis defense had started 3 hours ago. I was lying on a stretcher outside a warehouse at 11 a.m. on a Thursday, still wearing glow sticks around my wrists, still tasting chemicals on my tongue. My phone had 47 missed calls from my thesis advisor, Dr. Morrison. The EMT kept asking if I knew what I'd taken, and I couldn't form words to explain that I'd missed the most important presentation of my academic career because I'd been watching lasers for 8 hours straight. This started 2 days earlier when my roommate Chen told me about an underground rave happening Wednesday night. I'd been working on my thesis for 9 months, mechanical engineering, design specifications for sustainable building materials, boring technical stuff that had consumed every waking moment. My defense was scheduled for Thursday at 8 a.m. I'd practiced my presentation 30 times, had my note cards memorized, my suit pressed, everything ready. But Chen said this rave was legendary, only happened twice a year. People flew in from other states. The DJ was supposedly some famous producer from Berlin. I told him no, told him I had my defense, told him I couldn't risk anything going wrong. He said one night wouldn't hurt, that I'd been working myself to death, that I deserved to blow off steam before the big day. I should have stuck with no, should have stayed home and gotten a good night's sleep. Instead, I convinced myself that going out for a few hours would actually help, that I'd be more relaxed during my presentation, that the committee would appreciate seeing me confident instead of anxious. All lies I told myself to justify wanting to go. We left at 10 p.m. The rave was in this abandoned factory outside the city. No address. Just GPS coordinates Chen had gotten from someone he knew. When we arrived, there were already hundreds of people. Music so loud you felt it in your chest, lights everywhere, everyone dancing or standing around in groups talking. The energy was electric. Chen found his dealer within 20 minutes. This guy named Spider who looked exactly like you'd expect someone called Spider to look. Skinny, tattooed, wearing sunglasses indoors. He had tabs of acid for $20 each. Chen bought 4, gave me 2 and kept 2 for himself. I'd never done acid before, only smoked weed a few times freshman year. This felt different, more serious. But everyone around us was doing it. And I was already here, already committed to being out instead of home sleeping. Might as well experience it fully. We took the tabs at midnight. Chen said they'd kick in within an hour. We went inside and found a spot near the speakers. The DJ was playing this deep bass music that vibrated through the floor. People were dancing with their eyes closed, lost in it. I stood there waiting to feel something. It hit around 12:45. Suddenly, everything looked different. The lights had trails. Colors were more intense. The music wasn't just sound anymore. It was physical. I could see it moving through the air in waves. Chen was laughing at something. His face looked strange, features moving in ways faces shouldn't move. I started laughing too, even though nothing was funny. Just the sensation of laughing felt incredible. We danced for hours, or maybe minutes. Time stopped making sense. I'd look at my phone and 10 minutes had passed, but it felt like seconds. Or an hour had passed, but it felt like no time at all. At some point, I ended up in a different part of the warehouse, away from Chen, surrounded by strangers who all felt like close friends. We were all experiencing this together, all connected by the music and the lights and whatever was in those tabs. Someone handed me water. I drank it, and it was the most refreshing thing I'd ever tasted. Every sensation was amplified. The concrete under my feet felt interesting. The air moving across my skin felt profound. I sat down against a wall and watched people dance. Their movements were beautiful, synchronized even though they weren't trying to be. I felt this overwhelming sense of peace, like everything in the universe was exactly as it should be, like all my stress about the thesis defense was meaningless, just arbitrary pressure I'd put on myself. In this moment, under these lights, with this music, nothing else mattered. I'd spent 9 months obsessing over my thesis. For what? To impress a committee of professors who'd forget me the moment I graduated? To get a degree that was just a piece of paper? None of it meant anything. This present moment. This was what mattered. I don't know when I fell asleep, or passed out, whatever the distinction is. I was sitting against that wall, and then I was lying down, and then I was opening my eyes to sunlight. Actual daylight streaming through broken windows. The music had stopped. Most people were gone. A few were still scattered around sleeping or sitting quietly. My head felt like it was full of cotton. My mouth was dry. My body ached from sleeping on concrete. I checked my phone. Dead. Completely drained battery. I found Chen near the entrance. He looked as rough as I felt, asked what time it was. He checked his phone. 9:30 a.m. We'd been there all night, over 9 hours. I felt panic starting to creep in through the fog of whatever I was still feeling. My defense. I was supposed to defend my thesis. What time was that? I couldn't remember suddenly. Early morning. 8 a.m. maybe? Or was it 9? We stumbled outside into brutal sunlight. My eyes couldn't adjust. Everything was too bright, too sharp. My car was somewhere, but I couldn't remember where I'd parked it. Chen said he couldn't drive either. Still too messed up. We called an Uber. The driver took one look at us and almost refused the ride. Finally agreed, but said if we threw up, he'd charge a cleaning fee. The drive back felt eternal. Every bump in the road made my stomach lurch. My heart was racing. Anxiety building. I needed to get to campus. Needed to find Dr. Morrison. Needed to explain. But explain what? That I'd been at a rave all night? That I'd taken drugs? That I'd completely forgotten about the most important presentation of my academic career? The Uber dropped me at my apartment. Chen went inside, but I couldn't. Couldn't face being in a room with walls. Couldn't handle the stillness. I started walking toward campus. It was 2 miles away. I needed to move. Needed to do something. My phone was still dead. I had no charger with me. No way to call anyone. Just had to get there and face whatever consequences were waiting. Halfway to campus, I realized I was still wearing the glow sticks. Ripped them off and threw them in a trash can. My clothes were covered in sweat and dust. My hair was a mess. I probably looked like I'd been living on the street. This was not how you showed up to meet with your thesis advisor. Got to the engineering building around 11. The secretary looked at me with obvious concern. Asked if I was okay. I said I needed to see Dr. Morrison. She said he'd been looking for me all morning, that my defense was scheduled for 8 a.m., that the entire committee had waited until 9 before leaving, that Dr. Morrison was furious. She sent me to his office. The walk down that hallway felt like walking to my own execution. I knocked on his door. He called for me to come in, looked up from his desk, and his expression went from annoyed to shocked. Asked what the hell happened to me. I tried to explain. Said I'd been sick, food poisoning, couldn't leave my bathroom, phone died, couldn't call. The lies came out automatically, desperate attempts to avoid admitting the truth. Dr. Morrison didn't buy it, said I looked like I'd been partying, asked if I was on drugs. I denied it, said I was just sick and exhausted. He stared at me for a long moment, then said the committee wasn't going to reschedule, that I'd wasted their time, that 3 professors had cleared their entire morning for my defense, and I'd been a no-show, that this was unacceptable, that I might not graduate this semester, that I'd have to petition to defend next semester if they even allowed it. My entire academic career imploding because of one catastrophically stupid decision. I panicked, started begging, telling him this was a misunderstanding, that I'd really been sick, that I'd never miss my defense intentionally. He wasn't listening. Said I should go home, clean myself up, come back tomorrow and we'd discuss next steps. I left his office feeling like I might throw up, not from the drugs, from the realization of what I'd done. I'd worked for 4 years toward this degree, had one presentation standing between me and graduation, and I'd blown it, for a rave, for drugs, for one night of feeling like nothing mattered, except everything mattered, my future, my career, my entire life trajectory. All of it mattered, and I'd treated it like a joke. Got home and Chen was sleeping. I wanted to scream at him, blame him for convincing me to go. But that wasn't fair. He didn't force me, didn't make me take those tabs. I'd made every choice that led to this disaster. I plugged in my phone and watched the notifications load. 47 missed calls from Dr. Morrison, 23 texts from committee members asking where I was, 15 emails marked urgent. My parents had called twice. They knew about my defense, were probably waiting to hear how it went. I couldn't call them, couldn't face explaining this. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling trying to figure out how to fix this. There had to be a way. Some explanation that would make the committee reschedule. Some excuse they'd believe. That's when I remembered my friend Taylor from undergrad. She'd faked a medical emergency once to get out of an exam. Got a doctor's note saying she'd been in the ER. The professor had to let her retake it. It was fraud, obviously. But it worked. Maybe I could do the same. Claim I'd had some medical crisis, get documentation, force the committee to give me another chance. It felt wrong. More lies on top of lies. But what other option did I have? Admit the truth and definitely not graduate? Or take the risk and maybe save my academic career? I researched urgent care clinics that were known for being lenient with documentation. Found one across town that had reviews mentioning they'd write notes for anything. Waited until evening when I'd hopefully look less obviously high. Chen woke up and I told him my plan. He said I was insane. That faking medical records could get me expelled or worse. I said I was already facing not graduating. This was my only shot. He tried to talk me out of it, but I wasn't listening. I needed to fix this, and this was the only way I could see. Got to the urgent care around 7 p.m. Told the nurse I'd been having severe abdominal pain, that I'd been vomiting all morning. Couldn't keep anything down. She took my vitals. Blood pressure was elevated from anxiety, probably. She asked more questions. I described symptoms I'd Googled. Food poisoning or gastroenteritis. Something bad enough to miss important commitments but not bad enough to require hospitalization. The doctor came in, asked the same questions, pressed on my stomach asking where it hurt. I acted like everything hurt. Said it had been the worst 12 hours of my life. He looked skeptical but ordered some tests. Blood work, urine sample. Had me wait in the exam room for an hour while they processed results. Everything came back normal, obviously. Doctor said sometimes these things resolve on their own. That I should rest and stay hydrated. I asked if he could write a note documenting that I'd been sick. For my school. He hesitated. Said there wasn't much to document since the tests were clear. I insisted. Said I'd missed something important and needed proof I'd been genuinely ill. He finally agreed. Wrote a brief note on clinic letterhead stating I'd presented with acute gastrointestinal distress on Thursday morning. That I'd been evaluated and advised to rest. It wasn't exactly what I needed, but it was something. Documentation I could show Dr. Morrison. Took the note to campus the next morning. Found Dr. Morrison in his office again. He looked surprised to see me. I handed him the note. Said I'd gone to urgent care Thursday morning. That I'd been too sick to call. That I had medical documentation proving I hadn't just blown off my defense. He read the note carefully. Asked why it was dated Thursday evening if I'd been sick that morning. I said I went that evening once I felt well enough to leave my apartment. That I'd needed the documentation for exactly this situation. He didn't look convinced, but he couldn't really argue with a doctor's note from a legitimate clinic. He said he'd talk to the committee, see if they'd be willing to reschedule. No promises. They were all busy people and I'd already wasted their time once. But he'd try. I thanked him and left before he could ask more questions. Spent the next 3 days in complete anxiety, checking my email constantly, waiting to hear if the committee would give me another chance. Chen kept saying I should come clean, that the lie would catch up to me eventually. I said it was too late for that. I'd committed, had to see it through. The email came Wednesday afternoon. Committee had agreed to reschedule for the following Monday, 8 a.m. again. Dr. Morrison's message included a warning that this was my only second chance, that if I no-showed again, I'd be immediately removed from the program. I felt relief and terror in equal measure. Relief that I hadn't completely destroyed my academic career. Terror that I now had to actually deliver this presentation while carrying the weight of all these lies. Spent the weekend preparing, practiced my presentation 50 more times, memorized every slide, every statistic, every answer to every possible question. Didn't leave my apartment except for food. Didn't see anyone except Chen, who kept telling me I looked paranoid. Monday morning, I was at the engineering building an hour early. Sat in the hallway outside the conference room going through my note cards. The committee members arrived one by one. Each gave me a look that said they weren't happy about being there. Dr. Morrison looked tired. Told me I had 30 minutes to present and 15 for questions. Let's get this done. The presentation went perfectly. All that practice paid off. I hit every point, answered every question. The committee seemed impressed, despite their earlier skepticism. At the end, they asked me to step out while they deliberated. I waited in that hallway for 20 minutes, convinced they'd fail me just for making them reschedule. Dr. Morrison finally called me back in, said I'd passed, that my thesis was approved, that I'd graduate with my class as planned. I felt this rush of relief so intense I almost cried. I'd done it, against all odds, despite my monumental fuck-up. I'd actually made it through. But the relief was short-lived, because Dr. Morrison asked to speak with me privately after. Once the other committee members left, he closed the door, said he wanted to be straight with me, that he didn't believe my story about being sick, that the medical note felt convenient, that my appearance that Thursday suggested I'd been out partying, not lying sick in bed. I started to deny it, but he held up his hand, said he didn't need me to confirm or deny, that he'd decided to give me the benefit of the doubt because my work was strong, but that I needed to understand how close I'd come to destroying my future. That grad school and jobs and careers don't offer second chances like this, that I'd gotten lucky, that I should never put myself in this position again. I left his office feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach, relief gone, replaced by shame and guilt. I'd lied to my advisor, faked medical documentation, manipulated the committee into rescheduling, all to cover up the fact that I'd prioritized a rave over the culmination of 4 years of work, and I'd gotten away with it. That should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt hollow, dirty, like I'd cheated my way to graduation. Chen asked how it went. I told him I passed. He congratulated me, asked if I felt better now that it was over. I said no, said I felt worse, that the lie was going to follow me, that every time I looked at my diploma, I'd remember how I'd almost thrown it away, how I'd lied and manipulated to get a second chance I didn't deserve. He said I was being dramatic, that everyone makes mistakes, that what mattered was I'd learned from it. But I wasn't sure I had learned. I'd learned I could lie my way out of consequences. That wasn't the lesson I needed. Graduated 2 months later. My parents were there, proud, taking photos, talking about how hard I'd worked. If they only knew. If they knew their son had almost failed out because he'd been high at a rave, that he'd lied to everyone to cover it up, that his degree was earned partially through deception, they'd be devastated, disappointed, everything I feared. So I smiled for the photos and accepted their congratulations and carried the secret like a weight. Got a job at an engineering firm 3 months later. Good salary. Benefits. Real career starting. Should have felt accomplished. Instead, felt like an imposter. Like I was one background check away from someone discovering the urgent care visit. The suspiciously timed medical note. The truth behind my second chance. My supervisor praised my work. Said I had a bright future. All I could think about was that rave. Those 8 hours of feeling like nothing mattered. How close that mindset had come to actually making nothing matter. To destroying everything I'd built. Year later, I ran into Spider, the dealer from the rave. He was working at a coffee shop near my apartment. Didn't seem to recognize me at first. Then, he did. Asked if I wanted anything special, meaning drugs, obviously. I said just coffee. He said I looked different, more put together. Asked what I was doing now. I told him I was an engineer. He laughed, said he never would have guessed. Said most people who came to those raves weren't exactly career-oriented. I paid for my coffee and left quickly. Seeing him reminded me of who I'd been that night. How reckless, how stupid, how willing to throw everything away for a few hours of fun. The guilt hasn't faded. 2 years out now and I still think about it constantly. Wonder if Dr. Morrison ever told anyone his suspicions. Wonder if the clinic kept records of my visit. Wonder if someday someone will connect the dots. Wonder if I deserve any of what I've achieved, knowing it's partially built on lies. My friends from school think I'm successful. My family thinks I'm responsible. My co-workers think I'm dedicated. None of them know that I almost destroyed my entire future over a rave. That I lied and manipulated to get a second chance. That my diploma represents both my hard work and my willingness to deceive when cornered. Chen got married last month. At his wedding, someone asked about college, about our time as roommates. He started to tell a story about the rave, caught himself, changed the subject, protected my secret without me even asking. Afterward, I thanked him. He said everyone makes mistakes, that mine had just been higher stakes than most, that carrying guilt forever wasn't productive, that I should forgive myself. I told him I didn't know how. How do you forgive yourself for almost throwing everything away? For lying to people who trusted you? For succeeding partially through deception? He said by learning, by never making the same mistake again, by being honest going forward even when it's hard. Maybe he's right. Maybe the lesson isn't about the rave or the lie. Maybe it's about recognizing how fragile success is, how quickly everything can fall apart, how one bad decision cascades into dozens more, how easy it is to justify anything when you're desperate. I haven't touched drugs since, haven't stayed out past midnight on a work night, haven't missed a single deadline or commitment, overcompensating maybe, trying to prove to myself I'm not that person anymore, that I learned something, that the second chance wasn't wasted, but the diploma on my wall still feels undeserved, the success still feels hollow, the career still feels built on shaky foundation. That's the real consequence, not the almost failure, the permanent knowledge that when tested, I chose the easy lie over the hard truth, and it worked. And I have to live with that forever.